Salutations, listeners, and welcome back to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm your host, Alexander F., and today we are so excited to welcome back to the show author, esoteric researcher, and magician, David Rankine. And listeners, so many exciting things happening in this podcast that might answer questions like, why are, calling the spirits of the winds? Why is that such a vital aspect of ceremonial magic? Who or what is the Shekinah? And why is invoking this powerful feminine presence actually encrypted and found in the Solomonic tradition? What are the hidden potencies in the Solomonic pentacles that so many practitioners use, but maybe observations that have not been discussed until now? What are the key updates to actually practicing Solomonic magic in the 21st century with efficacy and with practicality? Well, we are so excited because the best person to answer that is here with us today, the inimitable David Rankine. David is an author, esoteric researcher, and magician who lives in Spain with his partner, artist and tattooist Rosa Laguna, and their daughter. And David, I know so many thousands and thousands and thousands of you listeners are familiar with David, but as you know, he's been making major contributions to the modern occult revival since the 1980s through lectures, workshops, presentations, articles, and books. And today, David is generously taking the time to share about his latest upcoming tome from Hadean Press entitled Clavis Spirituum, Expanding the Horizons of Grimoire Conjuration. And this is a follow-up book to the one that was released last year, Clavis Intelligentiarum, both from Hadean Press. And so in this tome, get ready, listeners, buckle up, because David shatters so many misconceptions about Solomonic magic while providing new ways to dial in the efficacy and practicality of ritual magic, and even adding new ways, new techniques, new ways to really think to best honor spirits in our own practice here in the 21st century. So we hope to discuss all of this and so much more. And with all of that being said, David Rankine, thank you so much, as always, just for taking the time and stopping on the podcast today.
Thanks, Alexander. It's always a joy to be here.
David, the honor is certainly mine. I was just telling you before the podcast, this has been such a long time coming, your book. And much like a magic lamp that I'm really resisting to touch and share with other people, it's been just so great to hear about some of the different updates and some of the things that you've been sharing. David, this is a massive, vital update to the Solomonic tradition. So can you just give us, before we get into the specifics, can you tell us about Clavis Spirituum? How did it come about, after you finished Clavis Intelligentiarum? What was the genesis of this book? How did this whole thing develop?
Yeah, I figured when I'd done Clavis Intelligentiarum, it was like, that was it. I was really happy with the book. It's a manual, gives everyone all the things they need to know. That's great. But not long after it came out, it was around the time that I ran the first online course for it. And as I was preparing the material and the questions I was getting from people on the course were making me think, oh, there's this little thing I didn't really go into, or this could be explained more. And then I started getting prompts from, some of the spirits I work with, saying, you need to look at this. You need to. And, I quickly realized I need to do a follow-up book that builds on it and takes the material further. Clavis Spirituum, and I didn't realize it is in fact going to be a trilogy, but the third book won't be for a couple more years. That will be, grimoire stuff outside of the circle. So, yeah, I was just getting the pushes, and like I said, there's all these things like people ask so many good questions. That's the thing I love. Like, I've run that course twice now. Running it again end of October, and the second time I ran it, I included a load of material from Clavis Spirituum. Again, great questions. That was actually, as I was writing the books, on more than one session, I went away with a couple of notes. I did myself, need to include something on this. Should put in something on what do you do if you want to deconsecrate a pentacle? There's like, because people ask those questions which you take for granted if you're fluid, you're experienced in the field, but you don't think necessarily that you need to tell people. It's kind of like that whole initial thing of how most grimoires were like patchworks of things that the person wanted to record rather than being manual to practice. And, we live in this time where there's so many great translations and texts being made available to people. But what, I'm been hearing from spirits I worked with is more people should work with the spirits. And to do that, you just need to tell them what to do. They don't actually need 100 more translations. They need manuals of this is all the things you do. And this, and not saying it's the only way, the best way, but giving them a template that works for you, that has worked, proven over a long period of time, that people can pick and choose from, hopefully find things that will be useful. And it just built up momentum, and far faster than I expected it to. I was getting prodded about, I got prodded by it about the winds. Like, you really need to go back and look at the winds. And that was, that's before Stephen Skinner and Daniel Clark's, first volume of BSSM had come out. And I thought, I bet there's stuff in there. I looked, there's the stuff in the Swarm Book of Honorius. So I contacted Stephen and said, Stephen, can you send me all the stuff on the winds, please? And he was like, yeah, of course. And he sent it to me. And there's this amazing conjuration of the wind in there for bringing the spirit to you. And, it's like 40 winds as well. It's not just one or two winds or stuff. You've got the winds from the different directions. And that gave me pause. But, well, actually, that makes sense, because when you call a spirit, you don't know where it's going to be. If it's in the heavens, in a corresponding place to where we are in the physical, it could be anywhere in the world, as it were. So the winds, you're saying them all up to different directions, so whichever one is nearest to it brings it back. And so I used the conjuration, did it for the planetary intelligence Jophiel, Jupiterian that I've worked with before. So I was able to get away with like a 3-day prep because familiarity with that spirit. Because my current circumstances, 7-day prep is something that's very difficult to fit in with, young child and things. And I had this whole load of questions for Jophiel, like, what about the winds? Should be doing it. And he was like, yeah, absolutely. Here's a line that you can actually add in, just to amend it, which I did. And I said, I also have added in the Shekinah into the conjuration of you. What about that? And yeah, we're very happy about that. And, asking questions about all the amendments I've made to practice, and everything came back very positive. Like, yes, this is all right, this is all good. And so from there, I went on to contact various musicians that I know, around the globe, saying, are you doing any conjurations in the near future? And the one said, yeah. I was like, could you do me a favor and add this wind conjuration in? Because my experience and my understanding of it is the winds transport the spirit to you much faster than the spirit coming, under its own steam, as it were. It's like the difference between the spirit walking or you sending an Uber for it. It's like, when I did the Jophiel conjuration, he was there, by the end of the first conjuration. I mean, obviously there was the familiarity. So with that, you do tend to expect them to come quickly. But I've got people all over the place doing conjurations of Olympic spirits and intelligences and different demons from Ars Goetia and the Verum and other of angels. Every single person, and we're into dozens of conjurations now, it's added up to, had the spirit turn up by the end of the first conjuration at the latest. Sometimes they even appeared by the end of the wind conjuration because you name the spirit that you're asking the winds to bring. It's phenomenal. To me, it seems like a revolutionary thing for modern practice, but it's not revolutionary in the sense of it's a reinstatement because they're in Summa Sacra Magicae, in the Sworn Book. You've got the winds being part of the conjuration process to bring spirits faster. And then that kind of fades away. You kind of get it a bit in things like hallucination, necromancy, Hetameron, but not. It's becoming the spirits of the air then, rather than specifically the winds being called in that way. And by the time you get to the 16th century, it's pretty much faded. And then you get into like the later stuff where it's becoming much more focused on the infernals and the demonic. And you get in the text where it specifically says you have to do this multiple times. It will take hours for them to come. But I think that's because there's no winds there to transport them. Whereas in SSM, you're specifically, calling the winds for the infernals and for the celestials as well. It says the only spirit that can't be brought by the winds is Lucifer. Anybody else but Lucifer. And that was people's experiences. All the feedback I got from people, everybody had those spirits there by end of first conjuration at the latest, the one that they were pulling up, which is great because obviously if you don't have to spend hours repeating conjurations, it makes the whole process a lot more doable. And, at the end, I was also giving it to people who didn't have a lot of experience, as well as experienced magicians, and they're also having success with it. Touch wood, it's been 100% success rate if everyone's used it so far for that speed. And if that continues, then, like I say, for me, that's like a radical shift in the grimoire conjuration world, and something, like I said, it was a reinstatement. I'm not adding something new. I'm bringing back something that was there in those early grimoires. And I was really pushed by, spirits that I work with and that I have pacts with. They were saying, go back to the winds, look at this. It was very much a case of, them wanting the technology to be there. So, I got pushed to find it, put it in, and like I say, then get other people to test it for me as well. I wanted to have a big data set of different people, different experiences, using different grimoires, different spirits, to see if it was uniform and worked for all of them. And so far, it has. So, yeah, that's kind of been the flavor of it. Getting pushed, like, look at this, think of this. And I just, so I go off and I go down the rabbit holes and I'm like, oh yeah, I add this in. Oh yeah, that works really well. Suggest it to other people. They go, oh yeah, thanks, that's good. Yeah, we like that. And so Clavis Spirituum has, kind of taken form and coalesced quite quickly. But I think maybe I need to make some, there need to be Rankinian planetary hours so that I don't get the spirit waking me up in the middle of the night telling me stuff in dreams, so I have to wake myself up and get up. Or, anytime, day or night, doesn't matter. You're walking down the street, you're sitting on the toilet, you're having a shower, you're eating a meal, you're asleep, you're reading a book. No, it's time for you to know this now. Here you go, bang. Okay, let's get this down. Let's make sure I get it all down so I can follow it, work it out, work it, and see where we go with it.
Yeah, that's one of the more powerful things, I think, is that your Clavis Spirituum has a spirit-based inspiration and element. You're just kind of spirits constantly at perhaps opportune or inopportune hours pouring inspiration into the chalice of your mind, but then also a human element where you specifically, the winds is a great example, you specifically solicit other practicing magicians and trying to get them to confirm that, which I think is just such a, speaking of hearkening back to old times, I'm thinking of the PGM, of course, but some of the scrolls that would say, tried X spell, worked 8 out of 10 times. Was that kind of your goal of, David, something that you touched on where we all love, of course, a latest translation or a fresh translation from the Latin from a 500-year-old grimoire. I love that. I think that's amazing. But it sounds like here your aim is something would it be fair to say very different, which is showing fidelity to the tradition, not, completely doing away with the tradition, actually affirming the tradition from 6, 7, 8, 900 years ago, but then finding new ways to apply that in the 21st century. Would that be a somewhat fair estimation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is totally where I'm going with the work, is having that fidelity, but making it relevant for the 21st century. Magicians always use the technology of the age. If a lot of the stuff we have now had been available a few hundred years back, you can be sure the magicians would have used it. And likewise, you look all through the grimoires, and there's this constant using the good stuff from before that worked. There's the core things that are part of the tradition, the consecration, the circle, the tools, the conjurations. There's all those core parts that you find repeated through the grimoires. It's like, the stuff that's in the elucidation heptameron gets used repeatedly in later books because it's good. So it's that thing, like I say, of having fidelity and taking the good stuff that works and works together, importantly, and building on that. I have added in things which aren't in any specific grimoire in the past. The core of it is, and most of the material is, but there's been bits where there are gaps because it might be stuff that wasn't even known then. So we need to add it in to keep evolving the tradition. That's my take on it. It's not any living tradition evolves. And I mean, that's the thing with the SSM for me at the end of the day. It's amazing. It's hugely important that the SSM is being translated and being made available because, here's this 800-page text that is a complete working system. It's not bits and pieces, put together. There's bits from all over the place. It's our first known thing in the Swan Book of Honorius. You got stuff from the lost 5 or 6 books of Solomon, which isn't King Solomon, it's like the magician Solomon. There's these various different texts, which stuff Liberatio in it, that have been all woven together into a workable system. So there's this hugely important material where we had gaps that it's filled a lot in, like the stuff about the seats, the sedes. The stuff that's in there is great. It gives us so much more. We know more now about things like that, the stuff with the winds. But if you actually look at the magic of Summa Sacra Magicae, that's not really practical for the modern world. 9-day conjuration, multiple circles, multiple conjurations a day, going for all of this stuff to get one end result, when you could just do a single conjuration and get the end result. Why would you, I'm all in favor of, working the system as stands if you want to, but in the modern age, most people don't have the time and the resources to do what Summa Sacra Magicae would take to work faithfully. It's not really very practical for us. For me, its value is in the amazing information there is in there. So, it impacted Clavis Spiritum quite a lot. Stephen kindly sent me the material on the winds, and then this, he shared stuff with me from the as yet unpublished parts of it, and there's more bits on the winds in there, which I was able to draw on. But again, it's just such a rabbit hole. Once I went beyond so we've got Summa Sacra Magicae and the winds and the Swan Book. Where else are we going to find the winds? So you start going down your rabbit hole, and it's like, okay, so there's later versions of it. Let's look at the Arabic stuff because it feels like that should be more. And then, sure enough, I started finding all this Arabic stuff. You and I were having a conversation, and you pointed out a couple of references in the Quran with the winds and jinn and Solomon. And I was like, so it's like, okay, let's go further back. And there's in the PGM with the Ecophadaemon, where it talks about the wind carrying. So it's like, this is obviously was a well-established concept for a long time. So, I mean, it's hugely important to have restored that to practice because, like I say, the difference it seems to make is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, let's kind of dive a little bit more into those windy topographies. But just to give listeners a couple of reminders. Number one, we are releasing this chat right now where pre-orders are available. So check the links below to pre-order your own copy, or if you watch this later, to order your own copy of Clavis Spirituum. But just to give you a taste, listeners, here are just some of the things that you will find in this tome. David sharing about the importance of the winds. Where is the goddess in the grimoires, which we're going to get into? A discussion of spirits within the work, the actual apprehension of spirits themselves, ways to increase, David, what you call magical momentum. I know Dr. Skinner calls magical tension, and Alison Tchaikovsky and others have talked about magical momentum. Wonderful observations that you have, David. Very fresh, new insights on talismans and more complex layman's. The engagement of the senses in conjuration, which is a fascinating topic. You can also, listeners, read about types of magic circles, and also something we'll get into about making offerings and landscape considerations, very important, as well as animals in the circle, very specific things regarding sensory impairment or mobility differences, depending on the operator and the situation of the conjuration. The conjuration sequence revised. So listeners, I know you'll remember, David in his previous podcast appearance and in the Clavis Intelligentiarum, the license to remain, while now revisiting the conjuration sequence, which we'll talk about, dialing it in, or a term, David, I know we'll get into, front-loading a ritual versus back-loading a ritual and why that's so important. But listeners, in addition to all of this and more tips and reminders, what's really cool, what I think you'll really appreciate too, listeners, is David has no less than 8 different appendices for sigils of spiritual creatures, the conjurations, the archangel prayers, the celestial spirit names and Hebrew divine names. If you are into psalmody and actually looking at the importance of psalms, psalm incipits for talismans and charms, new consecrations or additional consecrations, Hebrew letter transliteration, all of these things that we're going to get into, David. So why don't we kick off with where you kick off? Chapter 1, you were just touching on this. You are restoring the practicality of the return of the winds. And as you said that something seems to have fallen off around the year 1500. One of those is timing that you find in the Summa Sacra Magice or SSM, incredibly complex timing. And the other in the SSM and in the Liber Iuratus that falls off apparently after the year 1500 or so are the winds. And so can you elaborate, David, a little bit more on the winds? For example, in the SSM, in this 1346, nearly 700-year-old grimoire, you talk about how the winds are so important and that, quote, one of the folios in the SSM says that Solomon says that no one should be called alone. Not one wind should be called separately unless the winds of the whole world are called at the same time. Can you elaborate on that? Because some listeners might go, wait a second, in the grimoire tradition, I'm so used to calling one spirit at one day an hour and very linear. Can you talk about the importance of calling all of the winds and maybe the Arabic roots of that and anything you'd like listeners to know?
Yeah, as I was saying, in the conjuration, you're actually called 40, 40 winds. There's like a main one for each of the 7 directions. You have your northeast, south, and west, and then also southeast, southwest, and northwest. There's no northeast. That's like the spot where we don't have things attributed in the same way as there's no seat and there's no sedes, for the northeast, because that's your place of entry into the circle. So none for there. But like I say, I thought about that and it's like, why the hell 40 is a lot of winds? But then I thought, well, it does make sense. If you are sending those spirits out, secret life of spirits, we don't know what they're up to. There's no guarantee it's going to be at wherever it's home, mansion, palace, what might be off visiting a friend, might be doing whatever spirits do in their time. So sending them out in all different directions with the winds, and so that whichever one is nearest brings it, is a practical, incredibly logical practice. And as soon as I realized, I was like, yeah, that makes so much sense, because if it's something that happens to be off in the southeast but is normally in the west, and you've just sent the wind off to the west, the wind's going to go and not find it. So you're then going to have that longer period because you haven't got the wind transporting it back. So, and I'm sure some people can go, well, what about the northeast then? Because if there aren't any winds going there, well, then there's quite major ones in the north and the east. Some of the winds that are in those particular directions. So I guess between them, they would pick up the slack for anything that might be in the northeast direction. I kind of imagine it being a bit like, when sort of the plane comes in to land, that, your wind goes and carries it off, and whatever direction spirit might happen to be in, when it comes, it will change course so that as it's getting to where your triangle or circle of manifestation is, that particular direction, that it ends up on its final descent, as it were, from that direction, so that the spirit approaches from the expected direction. Because even if it's not in the direction, one thing we know is spirits are very particular about their direction, so they will approach from the direction of their residence, even if they were at a different angle direction at the time that they're called. They'll still come back round and come from that angle. It's very logical, that big number. There is another summoning in the SSM where you only call the 7 main winds, I found. I'm not sure that's been published yet. I've not gone with that because it's done with calling multiple spirits, and ones from specific directions. And I'm not a huge fan of multiple spirit conjuration. The winds is different because you'll send them all off to purpose, bring back a spirit. But to call up multiple spirits, which does happen in various grimoires, so you get one come and then another one come. My initial problem with that is the preparation you have to put in. Unless they're all of the same type, and then you're going to have to do things. You're going to have to switch your fragrance. Is the prep going to be good for all of them? Would they have different times hour-wise that you would have to have pauses and delays in the conjuration, etc.? It all gets a lot more technical when you're doing multiple spirit stuff. And as I said in the past, I don't see the point in working with multiple spirits when one will do the job very well for you. I'm not a great fan of doing loads and loads of conjurations of different spirits when you've got a few that can get all the jobs done. If you're happy with the ones you're working with, you've got good relationships, why would you need to? And at the end of the day, that is one of your first questions that, you ask the spirit when it comes is, do you know another spirit that can do this job better? And if they do, then you can ask them if they can bring it. But you don't need to have huge number. And it's like with pacts, which I talk a lot about pacts and stuff in the book as well. Every pact is an exchange of energy and something that needs to be obviously respected and maintained. So having multiple pacts is something else that has to be considered really carefully, because each one requires certain obligations. So, you wouldn't have pacts with 30 or 40 spirits, in my opinion. I think that would be crazy.
Yes, 100%. I'm just taking listeners a bunch of notes because every time I talk with David, I know David knows this very well. There's just so many notes and so many different places that we can go down. David, too, tell me if this sounds somewhat accurate. Reading your excellent work on the winds and a public blog post that you've already shared at this point, it seems that by using the winds, it can fix, if you will, two main issues that we see in the grimoires. One is the Lemegeton's Goetia is a good example, for instance, saying, well, if a spirit doesn't arrive, then it must be bound, it must be enchained by either another magician or perhaps one of the kings has it in service elsewhere. So the winds might address that, meaning finding the actual location where the spirit is. And the other thing it does is many times magicians will report, or also in some of the grimoires, you hear about spirits that take some time to arrive. A spirit is very slow to arrive, or you can get indications, but not a full confirmation. And it seems like by using the winds, you can really address a lot of these issues for rapidity of arrival. Would that be, again, somewhat fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And that conjuration from the SSM that I added the extra little bit in, you name the 40 winds, and it ends with this long semaphore, this string of 95 nomina magica and divine names. And, by blimey, I mean, the build-up of magic momentum and power when you go through those 95 names is phenomenal. And I've had, the people I've been asking to do it come back and going, wow, we found that was just like, that was insane. And I'm like, yeah, I know it. So there is a huge amount of power in there. And there's actually a bit in the SSM, which talks about that conjuration. And it says, why do we need the winds for that? To this answer, I so say that the semaphore and the winds must be called simultaneously. That conjuration has the winds in it, it has the semaphore. This is Ganella speaking. But with distinction, for the semaphore drives the devils by force, i.e. the power of the holy names is going to bring them, they don't have a choice. But the community union of the winds with a particular act, i.e. the winds are not, forcing them in the same way, although there is reference in the conjuration to them. That it says the winds are higher up in the hierarchy, so the winds, they don't really have a choice that the wind brings them. Because the semaphore forces with great holiness, but the union of the winds with little holiness. That wind conjuration, it's hugely important that it's got that intensely powerful semaphore of the 95 names as well, which, when you do it, it just builds up a crazy amount of magical force. And when I've done it, so as you're getting towards the end of it, you can feel the power in yourself, and the vibration and stuff it's incredible. It's like nothing I've experienced with other conjurations. It makes such a difference.
And this goes right into something we'll get into, David, about that's a great example of front-loading a ritual as opposed to back-loading a ritual. And so I think a great place to go from there, speaking of things that you do before actually calling the target spirit or the spirit that you're actually invoking or evoking, is this fascinating, I mean, you blew my mind with this when you were first sharing about it, but this is the identification that you make of the goddess in the grimoires, the divine feminine. And you say, quote, at first glance, you might ask, why is the grimoire tradition so male-dominated and lacking in the divine feminine? And you talk about the Virgin Mary is present in some of the earlier grimoires, but then that again falls off. And you talk about the incorporation that if you are a magician practicing Solomonic magic in the 21st century, one of the key things that you should consider is an incorporation of the divine feminine or the Shekinah into your initial consecratio Dei phase, if you will, of the Solomonic method. So this blew my mind. Can you share for listeners who might not be too familiar, what is the Shekinah and how is the divine feminine actually present and looked at implicitly or otherwise in the grimoires?
Yeah, that was another one that I kind of got hit with. Like, I was thinking about, like, say, the Virgin Mary in the early time through sort of 12th, 14th century. You've got the Virgin Mary in her role as the Empress of Hell, who all the demons are subservient to. And that sort of drops away, and she becomes more seen as a personal intermediary for people. But so that goes out the grimoires pretty much, or she's not there in that Empress of Hell role, certainly. I thought, well, where else is it? And then there's reference to the Most High Governess and Secrets of Solomon. There's a few Hecate references. There's actually an interesting one in Munich Handbook of Necromancy, where there's a spell for a throne that will take you anywhere in the world rather than invoke you, where all of the angel names, nearly recognize most of them, are the Greek names of the winds with L on the end. One of them being Aurora El. And of course, Aurora, the goddess of the dawn, who was also the mother of the winds. So it's like, oh, okay. So I got, what else is there? This is, there's these little bits of divine feminine stuff, but is there more? And I thought about the names. I mean, obviously there's that thing of the name Eloah. It's a feminine, is El with a feminine ending. So should we perhaps be translating that as goddess rather than God? Because it normally just gets translated as God, but as it's God and then it's got a feminine ending, what do we say in English? If it's a God that's feminine, we don't say God, do we? We say goddess. So let's start translating Eloah as goddess. And of course, Elohim, which is like version again of that, but you have like a feminine singular with a masculine plural ending. So male and female combined, singular and plural combined. So that goes off into whole other things about deity, and the deity essentially ultimately being beyond gender, but because of the duality of gender of that time, of the grimoires and the pre-grimoires, that by and large in the world it was seen as male female. Then where's the divine feminine to sort of have a balance, that what I have sometimes jokingly referred to as like the beardy god presence in the grimoires, that there needs to be. So I'm going to help start going through, let's look at some of the classic grimoires and see if there's anything about Shekinah, because the Shekinah, back in about 2009, 2010, I wrote about the Cosmic Shekinah, looking at the roots of the Shekinah and her influence in Kabbalah and her development from wisdom goddesses of the ancient world, like the stuff from Asherah, the parallels with the development of Shekinah and Sophia, the Gnostic Sophia and stuff. So it's obviously a subject I've looked at a lot and passionate about. And I talked a bit about the grimoires and that, but very little. So I was like, okay, where should we go? So I grabbed the Ars Goetia and start looking through, get the second conjuration and go. And by the four beasts that stood before the throne, having eyes before and behind, and by the fire round about the throne, and by the holy angels of heaven, and by the mighty wisdom of God, and by the seal of Baldachai, and by the name Primum Marton. That, in there, we've got 2-3 references which hint at the Shekinah. The fire around the throne. Well, one of the Kabbalistic creation myths is that the universe and the angels were created by God and the Shekinah, that God on his throne and the Shekinah forms a circle of fire around the throne, and their union creates the souls of man, creates the angels, it creates the universe. So the fire about the throne, to me, that's like hinting at Shekinah. Likewise, the mighty wisdom of God. Shekinah is the divine feminine wisdom. She is the wisdom of God. So we could argue that is as well. And the name Primum Marton as well, because that's like first breath. And she is the first breath. She is the breath of spirit. The Shekinah is the Ruach HaKadosh, the Holy Spirit, which again becomes sort of somewhat neutered and taken away from being the feminine. So just there, for me, you've already got several things which sort of hint at the Shekinah. There's stuff in the 9 keys as well, I found, January Magica Reservata as well, where there's references to things like palaces of wisdom, for example. And again, the Palace of Wisdom thing is a particular Shekinah reference. That's in all of the conjurations of the archangels in the 9 keys. There's a lot of Kabbalistic stuff in January Magica Reservata, so it's not really surprising that would have things that hint at the Shekinah. So then I thought, okay, let's go somewhere else. There's one quote I will put in there that I love from Rudd. There's, in respect of celestial angels, as aforesaid, etc., the opinion of Trithemius or any other natural conclusion is thus answered. They are all beams of that wisdom, which is the end of man's excellency. And if Trithemius or any other natural philosopher doth but seriously and well observe, they shall find that true wisdom is always painted in a woman's garment. It's like, yeah. I rather like that quote. But I looked at the Key of Solomon, going there, the extremely powerful conjuration. And there it says, and by the living God, who is one throughout the ages, whose dwelling is in the ineffable light, whose name is wisdom, and whose spirit is life, before whom go fire and flame, who hath from that fire formed the firmament, the stars, and the sea. If you kind of read that with a different emphasis, rather than just that it's all about God, and by the living God, who is one throughout the ages, pause. Now, Shekinah literally means dwelling. So, whose dwelling is in the ineffable light, whose Shekinah is in the ineffable light, whose name is wisdom, and whose spirit is life. She is the spirit of life. She is wisdom, and and she is in the ineffable, like saying the spirit, wisdom, life, light, all of it. So I'm going, yeah, okay. I think there's these hints of the Shekinah. I definitely feel I need to go into this more. There's lots of, obviously, all the wisdom stuff in the Bible and Proverbs and things, little bits of that come in as well. But I thought, okay, I want to find I'm going to include a prayer to Shekinah. So the prayer to God and the prayer to Shekinah in my conjuration sequence. I went and looked, and I immediately found this amazing 10th century prayer to the Holy Spirit, which I made a few minor changes to, but it's a beautiful piece by St. Simeon. And I incorporated that. And yeah, the flow of the ritual, the dynamic is so different when you do that thing of God and the Shekinah, because also she is the power of prophecy. So if she is the mother of angels, so she is above all the spirits. So having that force in your rituals is kind of like, why wouldn't you want that balance? Why wouldn't you want the Shekinah? Also, we are all united in the Shekinah. Now, this was, I think, probably the biggest thing for me. Beyond all of that she helps with prophecy, so she's great for spirit contact and things like that. We are all said to have a fragment of the Shekinah in us. Our divine spark is a spark of the Shekinah. So we are all united in the Shekinah. But that means that when you do the conjuration, you call on Shekinah and, you're calling her presence for the ritual, then you are doing the as above, so below of activating that divine spark within yourself, which gives you full authority to deal with spirits. You don't need to wear a funny paper hat or stuff and pretend to be King Solomon. It's like, no, I have this fragment of the divine in me, so I am completely entitled to engage with spirits in a way that will be beneficial for me and for them. Because at the end of the day, we are, that union in the Shekinah is something that we all will end up in. So, yeah, I have my three big questions there. It's like, about including the Shekinah, it's like, does it fit? Does it work? Does it add value? And I thought, yes to all of those. She fits in amazingly. The dynamic is there's an elegance and a flow and a beauty with having the Shekinah in the conjuration, which I really felt the difference of. Does it work? Oh yeah, big time. It was great. And does it add value? Yes, absolutely. You could also say, is it relevant? Well, yes, because the Shekinah is this, like I said, I wouldn't say I brought back this hidden tradition of the Shekinah in the grimoires. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is there's references which kind of could imply her, and there is no reason for her not to be there to have a better dynamic. Looking at the roots of where the grimoires come from, because, going back to, you've got your four main things, the Jewish, the Latin, i.e. Christian, the Arabic and the Greek. Well, obviously, the Shekinah's there in the Jewish. It's there as the wisdom goddess in the Latin. She's also in the Arabic stuff as Shakan. The Shekinah does make, is the only place that you could say isn't, is in the Greek. And then there's spirit sort of deities in the Greek, which kind of parallel the Shekinah anyway. So it's only logical that with all of the roots having that force there and having a divine wisdom, divine feminine wisdom, to bring that into the conjuration process. And, that's what I've done. And again, the people who have been trying it have been loving it. I've actually, a friend of mine, Seth Salem, I sent him it, and he sort of looked at it and he said, it actually kind of breaks into two parts, the prayer. And I realized he's right, because there's one part that's very much about come, all these names. And there's a second part where you're identifying with the Shekinah. And but if there's two of you working it, having one person, the conjurer do the first part with the calling to her, and then the scryer doing the second part with the identification, because that's the one who's going to be using the power of prophecy. And, I've kind of revised it so there's more Shekinah stuff spread through my preparation and things as well, and particularly for the scryer. Although I should add at this point, after the first book, where a few people commented they felt it was perhaps a bit heavy on it's great to do 2 or 3 people. I myself, more than half my conjurations over the decades have been solo. So in Clavis Spirituum, I've focused a lot more on people working solo, and, more hints and things and ways to facilitate and make it easier for, solo practitioners. But the Shekinah, that was it was more of a mind blower in some ways for me than the winds, because magic is always balance. Force and form. You always need to have balance. And my sort of study of Kabbalah has run hand in hand with the grimoires, since I was a teenager. And Shekinah is a huge thing in Kabbalah. The more you go back to Jewish Kabbalah and you look at things like the Bahir and the Zohar, and she's all over it. And that whole emphasis on balance that is there in early Kabbalah, like that. But it's only logical for it to be there in the grimoires. And it makes so much of a difference to the flow. I love the word Ilan, that sort of word. And there's an Ilan, like that sort of grace and elegance that comes with bringing the Shekinah into the conjuration. And I actually asked Jophil about this, because I did this, Shekinah conjuration as Shekinah prayer as part of his conjuration. And, the gist of him was like saying, we were, very happy. So we, not just me, we are very happy about this. And I said, is the prayer that I've used suitable? And he said, yes, this prayer is ideal. That's why we didn't show it to you before. Of course, when I'd done all the research, but I did not come across this thing at all. This time, when I was thinking, I wonder if I can find something, I literally found it in a minute or two. I went, oh, wow. Maybe it's because I use different terms. I'm not sure, but it just turned up and it's like, this is so perfect. This prayer is like absolutely stunning. And as people will see in the book, I only made very minor modifications to it. And one thing that I do tend to do now is, modernize the English with things a bit, because, again, talking about we're in the 21st century, doest to becomest and all terms like that, they can trip you up too easily, and it's not necessary. I do keep the Tao vine because I like the gravitas of that. But that's good. Pretty much anything else, I do tend to modernize the language up a bit in the conjurations, because it keeps, I think, an easier, smoother flow, and it's relevant to now. It's how we talk now. It's likewise if somebody was, doing it in Italian or French, I would say to them, speak it in modern Italian, modern French, not in, old archaic, for example.
Yes, and for those listeners who might be thinking, oh, exactly to your point, David, this blew my mind. And, for those who might think this is some kind of departure or not of the Solomonic tradition, you've clearly just disproven. But also, speaking of showing fidelity to the tradition and things that have dropped off, the biblical weight with the book of Proverbs, the wisdom of Solomon, the Song of Solomon, all of these very feminine characteristics, and I know you and I were chatting, David, and I can't help myself, but, even in Genesis chapter 1, and I'm quoting John Milton here, right, in book 1 of Paradise Lost, and chiefly thou, O Spirit, that dost prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure, thou knowest from the first was present, and with mighty wings outspread, dove-like, sattest brooding on the vast abyss, and madest it pregnant. So you have the Spirit of God, right? Genesis hovering above the waters, and there's this conception, there's this connection. But also, David, in addition to all of this, one of the great things that you point out, and I know the wonderful, excellent Joseph H. Peterson has done work on this. You also quote The Secrets of Solomon, that I know Joe's done a lot on, with this concept of the Amalthai or Amaltai, that the name Amalthai, as you say, is used for the spirits, which is likely derived from the ancient Greek goddess Amalthea, or the tender goddess. So this is already for that one skeptic out there who's like, I don't know. This is even in, as you say, all of the research you've done, and it's also in, like, the Secrets of Solomon, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Secrets of Solomon. It's the one place where you've actually got a conjuration where you are calling God and the Most High Governess. You are calling divine masculine and feminine in a grimoire text. So there is provenance there for anyone thinking, oh, no, you can't just add it in. Well, actually, you could, but there is a provenance for it. And like I said, it goes back to my point. Is it relevant? Does it work? Does it help?
And also that lovely point, and I think this goes, well, let me phrase as a question. So, David, does this go, actually, to your very great point about front-loading a ritual? So, for example, there are some people out there, and I'm not saying that this is bad at all, but you referenced, for instance, the paper crown, for example. I think there are people who, this is just my own thought, would love yours. There are people who really want to think that if they get the tools very correct, the lion skin belt, the paper crown, the specific tools above all else, that will equal success. And it seems what you're saying is, of course, materia magica are very important. But it seems that with the Shekinah, what you're saying, and tell me if this is right, is that the emphasis is front-loaded on the ritual, with you as the human, the operator, identifying as the imago Dei, the image of God. You're pulling that down directly so that in front-loading the ritual, you have that authority, you're commemorating your own authority and your connection effectively as an ambassador from the divine in the court of the ritual. Would that be, again, somewhat fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And having done that prayer to God and Shekinah and done that identification, you then do the wind conjuration subsequent to that, where you do this whole string of nomina magica and divine names. And like I say, you throw that Shekinah prayer in beforehand, and it is transformational. Those nomina magica it's crazy how much power it built up. Even just reciting it, as a string of names, without any other magical stuff going on, without a circle or any prayer, just reciting that string of names, you'll feel the power in it.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. And I think this goes to skip around a little bit, David, although I want to come back. There's so many topics, and I definitely want to talk about the way that we think about spirits with our 21st century values. We're going to get back to that. But front-loading the ritual. So key things, listeners, we've talked about so far. The prayer to the Shekinah, activating the divine feminine, of course, the prayer to God the Father, if you will, that kind of masculine energy. So the achieving balance and harmony there. And also, even before calling a target spirit, calling all 40 winds, no matter what direction, urging the winds to bring the spirit more quickly. So that's front-loading. The Shekinah is front-loading. Another front-loading, David, would love, and this is a whole chapter in your book, is different kinds of magical circles and also new magical circle arrangements. So can you talk about this specifically as it comes to the point of reciting the nomina magica, the divine names of God, that are known, of course, as the Semaphorus, these powerful names found in the SSM. There are some Semaphorus you recite that can help you bind spirits. There are some Semaphorus that you recite to give you success in a ritual. There are some Semaphorus that can increase your success as a human in your day-to-day life. There's all these different combinations of words that you can even find today in the Lemegeton's Goetia or the Heptameron. But you, David, have really addressed this head on with the Semaphorus. So I guess the question is, in terms of front-loading a ritual, what are the Semaphorus and how do you incorporate them into your front-loading of the ritual?
Okay, so there's the whole load of them that you find coming from SSM onwards. Like there's 7 of Adam and 7 of Moses, and there's a couple of like David and a couple of other characters who get where they're basically a string of like divine names, stroke nomina magica, like you say, which have particular purposes that were considered to be strings of names that were spoken to have this effect, and the magician can reproduce that effect. Obviously, when I was looking at the winds, I thought, I wonder if there's one that specifically goes to the winds. And sure enough, there was. We have the first Semaphorus of Adam used to command the winds, demons, and spirits. But okay. So that is Adonai, Sabaoth, Yahweh, Hanora, or Hanora, depending on the text. So I tend to go with Hanora, which translates as grace. I know Joe Peterson suggests it's from Hanora, the terrible. I think because of my Shekinah vibe, I'm inclined to go with grace as being part of that. But I thought, that semaphore particularly jumped out at me out of all of them. And when I was speaking with Jochel, I was talking about improvements I could make. And one thing that one of my other spirits had said to me in a dream was, use a free band circle. And, I'd been using a single band circle for a long time very successfully, and that's what's in Intelligentiarum. So, but okay, well, that's why I thought, what would I put in the bands? I thought, well, logically, that first semaphore of Adam should go into one of the bands because it's controlling the winds, the spirits, the demons. It's a perfect thing to have in one of the bands of your magic circle. I thought the inner one, appropriate divine names, and the outer one, I thought I sort of had some conversation with Joffil about this, because I asked him and he was being a bit cagey, and his caginess kind of prompted something in my head that made me realize. I said this and this and this, and he was like, yes. It's like he wanted me to. He could confirm. He would confirm it, but he wanted me to sort of receive the inspiration. And I think sometimes that spirits will at times test us or want to see that we're worthy of, getting what they are giving to us. And so I had this thing of, of course, that you go back to the Heptameron, the Lucitation, SSM, but also prior to that in things like into the Arabic, Shams al-Arif, of having like the names of the sun and the moon in the different seasons. And I thought, what are the key principles? At the end of the day, strip it right back. What are the key things? It's the sun as the star in the center of our universe, the light-giving sun, which we tend to do pretty much all the consecrations under as well. It's the moon, because it's either going to be in sunlight or moonlight that the conjurations are done, and the earth that we're standing on. So the outer band of the circle should have the sun, the moon, and the earth names for the season, so that we're like dialing it in so logically, so sun in the east, because that's the place of fire, the rising sun, moon, water, west, earth, north, earth. What do I put in the south in the place of air? because I work the pre-Levi fire in the east, air in the south, that goes back to ancient Greece, that actually fits with, standard elemental theory. And then it hit me, the name in the south, which is like, where it's the breath of life, the wind, should be the magical name of the conjurer. So that circle is then personalized to you. So even if another person used exactly the same circle, it would not be the same because it would have their magical name. And it's an identification between you and the magic circle as well, which adds another level to that side of the ritual. The connection of you to the circle. It is your circle. So on the outside, the outer band, you've got those names with pentagrams between them. Then the first semaphore of Adam, and then the inner one. I've gone. My default that I'm using is Rach Elohim, Shekinah, and El Gabor. El Gabor, strong God, which, interesting enough, never appears in any of the grimoires, although it's in the Bible a lot. Basically same roots as Gabriel. I felt the Shekinah should be honored by having her name in the circle. I like El Gabor. I just felt it was the right thing to do. And also because when I looked back on the whole process that started me towards writing the Claves book, so I was tracking back to experiences I'd had and rituals I'd done to see where did the seeds of this all get planted. I realized it was with a conjuration of Gabriel many years ago. And so I thought, also to honor that. And also Gabriel has been one of the big forces pushing me to write Clavis Spirituum, which really surprised me. I don't consider having a particularly strong personal link with him. But nonetheless, there has been stuff that's kind of come through from that direction. So I thought, okay, well, it's only appropriate to honor that by using the El Gabor name, which ties in with Gabriel. And Ruach Elohim, I love the fact because, like spirits, deities, Holy Spirit. So those are the ones I use. And it also, because Ruach Elohim has that mixture of masculine and feminine, Shekinah is feminine, El Gabor, strong God, masculine. So it has an equal balance of divine feminine and divine masculine in its names on the inner band as well, which I like. So obviously that could be adjusted by the practitioner, but that's the style of the circle I'm now doing, the triple band. And I comment in the introduction to the book and say, nothing wrong with the single band. And I've used it for many years successfully, but I'm also a great believer that, in the year between writing the one book and getting the other one done, my practice has jumped a lot from the research I've done, from the push I got from the spirits, from the rituals I've done and what I've learned from those rituals. We always do the best we can at a time. So there's stuff in this book which revises and improves on what was on Clavis and Hadean Press. We should always be open to making a practice the best it can be at the time. And switching the circle for me reflects that improvement that's happened for me in my practice. Single band still works fine. I actually used that for something not that long ago rather than the triple band because it was easier in the circumstances. But it's a shift that I have made based on, like I say, experience and the insights I had. I've also had in other circles, like a general consecration circle, which is not specifically for the stuff you're going to use in a conjuration, because I'm very believe that you consecrate the stuff you're going to use in a magic circle in that magic circle. But for general consecrations of other stuff, like for example with pentacles, which again has the names of sun, moon, and earth in the seasons, and the recipient of the pentacle. So it might not be a magical name if you're making it for somebody else, but you would put their name there. So again, connection. And then on the inner band, I use the divine names Yahweh, Mekadishkem, and El Emet. So God who sanctifies and God the truth. again, names that aren't in the grimoires, but really should be. They really should be in the tradition. They're in the Bible, same source code. So, I've done this big appendix of loads of divine names that aren't specifically in the grimoires, but are great to, I think, use in things like pentacles and circles and stuff. And I particularly love, God who sanctifies, I think, is just such a great divine name. And another circle, another 2-band, which is like one for general divination circle. Because that's something I've done. So it's, doing a divination before you're going to do a conjuration to get insight in if there are likely to be any bumps along the way, things to look out for. Just to smooth the passage along. Get the same thing, sun, moon, and earth on the outside with the recipient of the divination, because you can also use it for divining for other people. And then on the inside, in a band, I put El Roy, God who sees, and again, elevate God, the truth, just because truth is kind of relevant for divination. But that also brought me to another point, which is the whole thing of, for most celestials, are not very keen on triangles. They want a circle of manifestation. There is one given in Room of Arthur Gauntlet, and you see them in some other places as well. And likewise, the Olympic spirits, in my experience, prefer a circle, not a triangle. This is something which I was told in a ritual some years back, in a group ritual. The Olympic spirit said, "We don't like the triangles, we like this." Did another ritual, was a group thing where it had 3 separate seers, and all of them were told by the Olympic spirit, do a circle. All individually, they all were recording what they got. And another time after that, so I thought, okay, you've had it on multiple occasions. If I work with Olympics, I always just use a single band circle with the planetary symbol top and bottom, and then the name twice, going around clockwise of, well, it might be, so for example, Saturn symbol, Eritron, Saturn symbol, Eritron. So yeah, it's that thing of triangles for infernals and intelligences, Olympics and other celestials working with a circle of manifestation rather than a triangle. It's been something that I have stressed. It's interesting as well, you see reference with working with fairies with a pentagram rather than the circle or a triangle in, for example, the Book of Treasure Spirits.
Yeah, that was a really big game changer, because again, it's single band circles, as you say, can be great, but I think this goes to your analogy of if a successful conjuration is defined as a spirit arriving successfully, you could take an Uber, you could walk, you could ride a horse, there are different ways that you can dial in and really amplify the efficacy of a ritual, as opposed to, sure, if you could walk from one side of the earth to the other if you had enough time, but it's about dialing it in. And I love that, David. In fact, just to skip around a little bit on the front loading part. So you front load the ritual with the Shekinah. You front load the ritual with the calling all 40 winds, no matter where the target spirit dwells, to bring the spirit more quickly. You front load the ritual with these specific multi-banded circles in order to really dial into the timing, and the Semaphorus you front load. So the divine names and the timing, which seem to has dropped off a little bit after the year 1500. Another way that you front load the ritual, specifically as the circle is being drawn, you have a great synthesis that you have and modification from the Sworn Book of Honorius, where you call angelic spirits. This is front loading. This is way before you even have the target spirit. You call the angelic spirits to the Seat of Shamayim. And you mention, quote, as Yahweh and the Shekinah command all of the spirits to obey, to increase their honor, therefore come. This is fascinating. It's something that is from the Sworn Book of Honorius about 700 years ago. And to me, this is a wonderful way that you front load the ritual. So for listeners, David, who might be hearing about this for the first time, can you talk about What is this Seat of Shamayim, and why is it important, even before you call a target spirit, why is it important to invite, to call down celestial spirits, almost to literally sit and witness the ritual that is about to happen? What is going on here?
Okay, so this is like really the first activity in the conjuration. It's like setting up your triangle or circle of manifestation before you have stepped into the circle and started, preparing that. And yeah, the shaman thing was like something that just leapt out at me because it's there in, Sefer Harazin. So then we're going back to like 5th century CE. It's like a good 800 years before Summa Sacra Magicae. You have reference to the Seat of Shamayim. Shamayim literally being heaven, but it's like the first heaven specifically. That of the moon. But to me, that is like so immediately thinking, sublunar. And I see the first heaven as being the lower astral plane. It's the same. It has the same physical appearance as our physical plane. It's like superimposed over it. But it's sort of coexisting there. But that's where you're bringing the spirit to. So this is where things like considering landscape and stuff comes in, that we'll probably get to later. So the spirit, the Seat of Shamayim is it's like the idea of like the throne, like say, for the spirit to be enthroned in. We have this long history there. And so where you have your crystal or mirror, you are essentially setting up, superimposed onto that first heaven and the lower astral, the Seat of Shamayim. So it resides there in the same locus as your crystal or mirror that it engages through. So you're sort of activating it on that, that level, occupying the same space, but once removed. And likewise, before you put we'll just rather than keeping saying crystal mirror, I'm just going to say crystal. Say your crystal that you anoint with the olive oil, and you put in there. So there's a coat over in that same olive oil. If you're solo, you anoint on your own eyes, little crosses. If you've got a scryer, then it gets anointed onto there. So again, there is like a direct physical magical link between the crystal that acts as your gateway and you as the person who engages with the spirit through that gateway. So it's all about building on layers of connection. It's my principle of like, layers of simplicity to achieve, efficacy.
Yeah.
So the Seat of Shamayim, it's giving the spirit, recognizing that the spirit is traveling on that lower astral plane. It's not traveling on our physical plane. It might have the same landscape, but it's not the same place. And therefore, by setting it up as the Seat of Shamayim, you are doing honor to the spirit. You're showing respect to the spirit. So the spirit is far more likely to come and be positive to a conjurer who is like honoring like its own traditions. You have the whole thing of seats and thrones with spirits is quite a big deal for them. So the fact that you are setting that up as the locus for them to engage with you through is immediately starting off on a positive footing. And that's one thing I've tried to do when I've gone through the revised sequence of the conjuration, is try and put things over more, looking at it from the point of view of the spirit that is coming to engage with you, and not just you as the conjurer. You are showing respect. You are considering the point of view of the spirit that you want to get things from. You're either going to want information or a task done, or both. So from that perspective, it is transactional. It can develop into a stronger, relationship through a pact or what have you, or through repeated connection over time. But at the end of the day, first conjuration is transactional. So doing everything you can to establish courtesy and respect in there is, again, more likely to increase your success. It demonstrates your integrity to the spirit, which is something that is stressed in some of the grimoires like the Arbitel. Spirits that aren't impressed with you or don't like you, they'll either not come or they might even try to screw you over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so, and I think this goes to something I know yourself. I know Frater Ashton Chassan has said one of the most important qualities in any magical operation is sincerity. And so I think a lot of the front loading you're doing is sincerity. The way I think of this too, David, and I'd love your thoughts on this. So front loading a ritual, I think of it as before you even call that target spirit, you're filling up your celestial chalice to the brim. You have the Shekinah, you have prayers to God the Father, the Semaphoros, the divine names, of course, the other spirits, the winds. You are filling up so that chalice, that celestial chalice on the front end is so full and so brimming with potentiality and energy, if you will, that the rest of it's like water flowing downhill. The rest of it goes very smoothly. So here's my question for you. If that's front loading a ritual, this is for the listeners out there, what is your perspective on backloading a ritual and some of the problems with that? For example, things that come to mind might be backloading a ritual could be not doing a lot of the celestial work up front. And so at the end of the ritual, you get things like in the Lemegeton's Goetia, curses, chains, threats, maybe an over-meticulous reliance on the manipulation of external hierarchies, or infernal hierarchies, even though the sedes are very important. I guess, let me turn it over to you. If all of this is front loading a ritual, what is backloading a ritual, and what are some of the problems with that?
I mean, as you say, you kind of elucidated most of it rather nicely there. But, it's like pouring water down a funnel, and it all goes into, comes out nicely in the spout at the bottom, concentrated effect. Or if you turn that funnel upside down and try and pour water into it, one, most it's not going to go into the spout, and two, what does is going to get dispersed. I think the thing of backloading is, like, say, leaving out stuff, not having things like the winds, not dialing in timings, not thinking prayers are important. The prayers are there for good reason, and just going through this seat, because you don't have the winds or the other things to speed up the momentum. Then you have the sequence of a conjuration, a stronger conjuration, an even stronger conjuration. Oh, you didn't turn up, you bastard! Right, we're going to curse you, curse, etc. That's like the spout's upside down. It's crazy that the Ars Goetia gets so much hype, I think, because of Crowley. But for me, there's so many, and I worked a lot when I was younger as well. I had really good results from spirits with Ars Goetia. So I'm not, having a go at the Ars Goetia, but there's so many other good grimoires and different spirits to work with who I think you can get equally good results with far easier way of doing things, and that is essentially the front loading, because that brings to another point I talk about in the book, which is you don't have to wait for that week's preparation. Start building up your magical momentum. Let's say you decide, I'm going to do this conjuration. What's going to be a good time for it? I'm going to do it in 3 months so I can book off this day off work. Let me just check astrologically. There's no major bad aspects here, so this is going to be the planetary hour when I need to do this, for the conjuration to start, etc. Right, so let's say it's 2 months away. Right, well, rather than waiting till that week beforehand, you can start immediately building up your magical momentum. It's kind of like, rather than getting in the car then and starting it, it's like you start the car now. By the time you get to that week, your car's running hot. You've already gone up a couple of gears. You're like moving smoothly, and you just, the accelerator, put on the accelerator, you're building up the speed. rather than having to start it cold. And that can just be simple things like, stick on the planetary model for now, like the Olympics, the intelligences, etc. The fragrance that you're going to burn, or having, my preference is the oil burner, as I said before, rather than resin, but you could be wearing a bit of that every day as a perfume. That way, when it's burnt in the ritual, there is this thing of like, your aura is going to be permeated with it. You've been fragrancing yourself with it for weeks or months. So there's the identification of that. And then you have it being burnt as an offering to the spirits, and it being used as a vessel that the winds carry the prayers and the conjurations on to the spirits. So I call it, the communion of fragrance, that it's all of those factors in there. So you could, that's a simple one. You could be wearing an item of clothing of the appropriate planetary color every day. It could just be something like socks or underwear or stuff. You don't have to go crazy on it. You could have a item of like a crystal or piece of jewelry with an appropriate stoning of that planet that you carry around with you. There's various simple things like this, just to be building that momentum up. The prayers to the archangels that are in Heptameron elucidation, they all essentially have little semaphores in. You can take those out and recite those on a daily basis, so that when you get to the prayer at the conjuration, you have front-loaded that semaphore by doing it for weeks, so that that final recitation of that semaphore that you've been doing every day has an extra punch to it, to offer that to the archangel who, you're not expecting the archangel to turn up, but you are making that offering, but you're higher up in the hierarchy, please ensure they turn up, so you are giving them, it's like an extra level of respect by doing that, by sort of having dialed in and strengthened that semaphore, so that when you say it that last time, boom, you really feel it sending that energy off. Things like that. To no need at all to wait until that final week. You can be doing little things every day in the build-up, and that will increase your chance of successful conjuration. So there's a whole chapter about that in Clavis Spirituum as well, because that was something that came about from the first conjuration course. Somebody was saying about magical momentum, and then I just stopped the top of my head, went, well, of course you can do this and this and this and this and this, and I'm like, oh yeah, got a right chapter on that when I get home, Andy.
Touche. Yeah, exactly. And also, things that you've touched on before, weeks before a ritual, right? And even in life, not swearing, right? Not being blasphemous or taking the divine names, especially before, during, or after. My goodness, never reciting those. Meditation, quieting the mind, learning to differentiate your own internal kind of quote unquote, in the Buddhist sense, monkey mind thoughts from potential verdant new thoughts, the new information that comes from a spirit. Does all this too, in terms of weeks before, does that also go, of course it goes to your concept of magical momentum, does it also go to someone, David, who I know you've had may he rest in peace, had a great relationship with, Dr. Joseph Liszewski. He talks about subjective synthesis, and the more you recite something, the more you research something, the more it also increases the density or the gravity of meaning for you, the operator. Does also this preparation kind of also augment what Joseph Liszewski would call that subjective synthesis?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, using those semaphores like that, they really do add a depth and richness to it. They add more oomph and power. And I do recommend totally with the wind conjuration that people practice and rehearse it, because it takes a little bit of getting used to. You're going around, you've got to recite these names, 40 names. You go around the circle 7 times when you're doing the conjuration, and the first time round you've got to say all the names, so you have to practice walking really slowly, because from say east to southeast, you might have to recite 6 names. So you're literally putting one foot in front of the other super slow while you recite the names. And then then from the sort of second rounding going on, it's all the bits you say, and then the string of the 95 names. And if you've gone around 7 times and you haven't finished your string, then you just go around so that you end up facing the direction of your triangle or circular manifestation. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Joe Shefsky, he was such a character. I think he would have been so excited with things like Joe Peterson's elucidation of necromancy and stuff. He would have absolutely adored that.
100%. I often think about that. Yeah, he would love Joe's work. He would love Clavis Spirituum. I can say that. I mean, I just think pushing it forward and dialing it in. And I can't in a little bit, David, I'd love to talk about, we have a lot of things with landscape, with even trees, and specifically tree branches that we'll get into. Also archangelic sigils and kameas, which we'll get into. But let me go to chapter 3 of your upcoming book, which again, listeners, check the links below for pre-ordering or ordering if you're watching this a little bit later. You have a really great reframing about how us humans think about spirits. And I'd love for you just to, of course, listeners, you will get the full, David's full thoughts in your own copy of the Clavis Spirituum. But I love this framing, David, where you say, quote, "It's important to consider the nature of spirits before you start working with them. Do not anthropomorphize spirits and see them as intangible humans. Apart from the spirits of the dead, other spirits do not have the same behaviors, psychological and emotional makeup, and as such, as to a large degree, are unknowable in their nature and essence," end quote. So let me just ask you this, why is it so important for people to not anthropomorphize spirits and see them as merely bodiless humans? Because as you know, on some of the forums, you will see people who say, well, I would never treat a spirit like that because it violates, the humanist manifesto of, version 3, or this is something I would never do. And I really believe in altars and offerings and treating with the utmost respect, which almost implies to me, David, that someone's kind of subtly saying that Solomonic magicians disrespect or do not treat the spirits correctly. Can you please break this misconception about this whole anthropomorphizing of spirits?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we have to look back to the time, and certainly, if we take the Megaton's Goretia, then yeah, it is very much, particularly with the Infernals, this idea that they need to be like kept in their place and bound in place. So the emphasis there is these are not like people; these are these demons. They're not nice. They will try and screw you over if they can. So that is why they have to be bound and controlled. So they're certainly not being anthropomorphized there. So the modern time, there's kind of been like this duality of, like, on the one hand, people saying we should have a symbiosis and, work effectively, which is like my take. But you also, like you say, get the people who go into this almost, oh, we've got to be nice to them. And it's almost like, so I think I'll say this without offending people. Some people have this thing of not wanting to offend. It's like the sort of people who might say, I'm not racist, I've got, a couple of black friends. It's the people who don't really understand it, so they feel they have to put a perception on it, and their perception is the way it is. And the only perception that they have experience of is that of, humanity, and often not the most positive aspects of humanity. So they will then project that onto the spirits rather than understand that the spirits are completely separate, completely distinct. They're not human, so they're largely unknowable to us. And, their motivations, why they do the things they do, all you can know is there are spirits who at given times are willing to come and engage with us, and that we do these transactions with, and who will tell us things. So beyond that, the moment we start trying to say, yes, okay, so you're my mate, and also treating them just like a friend, and that the spirit, you've always got to question stuff with spirits, not just take it all as read. Like this particularly comes in when if you have a familiar spirit, you don't have to do what a spirit tells you to do if you don't think it's a good idea. That to do so, to do anything a spirit tells you to do, hands over agency, it hands over, your authority to the spirit. And whilst, as I say, I do stress more of a symbiosis, at the same time, that's based on respect. And the spirit's going to also lose respect for someone who just lets it be their master.
Yeah, really great points. Really great points, David. I mean, I totally agree with you. And I think that like the values of spirits, we can even speak in those terms because, as you say, the lives of spirits and what they're up to, what they do outside of a ritual can be, just a constellation of possibility. But I totally agree with you that the value, like as humans, we value, of course, equality and treatment for all and supporting basic human rights. Well, a solar spirit values frankincense, in other words, the values and the way that we think about spirits is totally different. Also, to take a very I suppose, famous analogy from Dr. Stephen Skinner with spirit taming, if you will, to horse taming, and you have the carrot and the stick. And so for people who might want to try to anthropomorphize, I always say, okay, that's like in a way, that's like a horse tamer only using sugar lumps to tame a spirit, or only, just sugar and carrots forever, and as opposed to that mix of different techniques. I don't know if does that make sense? I'm not sure if okay.
Yeah, there has to be a firmness there. There's nothing wrong. I absolutely encourage people to be respectful to spirits, but at the same time, you are going in with that fragment of the Shekinah in you, of that divine authority. You are not there to be a second-class citizen in the relationship with the spirit. You are offering things in exchange for it to do things for you. You're not there to make a new best invisible friend. At the end of the day. And even, if you look in, there are other systems. If you want a system where the spirits will look out for you and, give you like good advice on how to live your life and what you should be doing, then really you should be going up to something like leukemia and working with the Orisha, for example, who I've seen with people, who do work for Orishas. The Orisha's advice is always good, and people ignore it at their peril. But they are spirits which are specifically keyed in, or to that kind of, it's a completely different style of engagement. The relationship people have with the Orishas is a very personal one, and so then the Orishas expect a lot from the person. That is very different to grimoire spirit engagement. I will listen to things that spirits have told me, and I will follow the information down the rabbit hole. I don't just accept it blindly. It's interesting, and it's always good when it pans out. It generally does. Like being told, for example, one time I asked where a particular grimoire manuscript I really wanted to find was, and I was told it was in this library, and it was like, I'd already looked, and then I was told, yeah, but it's been mislabeled, you need to go back and look at this. And I went, and it's exactly as I was told. And, there's no way I could have known that. It's people go, how do you know it's a real spirit contact? Well, I have my ways of testing it. But even beyond that, when you get information that you can't possibly know, that's always a good indicator as well. And sure enough, I went back, there it was exactly as I was told. So it's always good to check that the stuff does pan out, particularly with infernals. They're not above being a bit tricksy at times with people. But the more you engage with a spirit and work with it over time, then the stronger the relationship becomes. It becomes more like a mutual respect. Again, I still wouldn't consider it like being a friendship thing. It's not about friendship, because it's like between two completely different types of being, between a human and a spirit. But there is a mutual respect there, which can be beneficial in both directions. But even then, even if you have a pact with something, then as I say, you still don't have to take on the things it might tell you to do if you don't think they're going to be beneficial. Never give up your agency to the spirit of grimoire conjuration, which is why you're in that circle as well. You are standing without a circle or outside the circle where you are accessible. You are infused with your divine authority in a consecrated circle. It's the way it is done. You show that you are a force to be reckoned with, and that there is a positive engagement to be had there for the spirit as well as for you.
I think that's again, listeners, I hope you appreciate that as much as I do, because it's such a powerful reminder, David. Thank you for sharing that, about you receiving legitimate information as the result of a ritual is not something that has to be followed dogmatically. It's not something that you have to necessarily employ, but it's something that comes via the successful conjuration of spirits. I absolutely appreciate that. And specifically saying, hey, friendship, quote unquote, is not the goal, and approaching each spirit in terms of the office and the role that it is there to fulfill or engage with, I think is so important. For example, in the book, one of the fascinating things that you share about is looking at spirits with being intermediaries, especially spirits that haven't been talked about as much. And of course, I'm referring to the demon bishops, which in the Book of Oberon, as well as other source material, you talk about this. And I'd love for you to share about this with the listeners, David. What are the demon bishops? And specifically, can you tell us about this very important connection you made about bishops, the demon bishops being intermediaries and really serving a unique function in magical rituals? Because some people might have heard about the demon bishops, but maybe not everyone.
Yeah, so the demon bishops, I first came across them in Grimoire of Arthur, the Book of Treasure Spirits. But they're also, like say, in Book of Oberon, of Angels, Demons and Spirits. Cambridge Book of Magic is the first place. Found them. I think I've found a couple more since then, actually, as well. They turn up quite a lot. It's generally the same conjuration with variations on it throughout the different books. It's basically for returning stolen goods or runaway people, the conjuration. It's really interesting because, their names are done on a lead plate. It's very reminiscent of like the PGM, of like the Depictiones from ancient Greece that you see in the PGM period. And yeah, when you look in some of the books, then it starts talking about them as being they're directly under the kings, the four kings, under Orion, Zamaron, Paimon, and Egin, and that they have the powers of the elements. So you have Veltrion in the east with fire, Boyfion in the south with air, Sperion in the west with water, and Meiron in the north with earth. So we've got a group of what I discovered from experience, intermediary spirits who are directly under the four kings, associated with the powers of the four elements specifically, which grabbed my attention because there's an awful lot of planetary stuff through the grimoires. There's not as much elemental. And when the quotes about them state about them having the powers of the elements, I thought, I want to find more of it. And working with them showed that they do, they can be used for lots of other things as well. really the only limit there is the things that you associate with a particular element, but that demon bishop works with. And so, the book does go through the conjuration sequence of them, where you call on, you do the prayer to the king above them, and you do the conjurations of the demon bishop. Interestingly, you have them directly under the kings, and then seems being above spirits that are called counselors and messengers, which includes a few of the goetic spirits, like Visago, for example, Anaboth, Belial. So as they are intermediaries with those below them, that gives an alternative method to get to contact some of, for example, the goetic spirits. If you didn't want to do the goetic sequence, you could just conjure the demon bishop and get them to bring you that spirit. So there's not that much about them. So I work through with them and on the principles of these elemental things are probably going to be the kind of things you're going to like, and getting confirmation accordingly of like fragrances, colors, etc., to use with them. So they're quite fascinating, because the intermediary aspects of them being directly below the four kings means they're in like the ideal position to be the go-to per spirit to get any info for any particular task that's going to be relevant. And if it's going to be a task that's something that you would associate with being an earthy thing, like a thing for getting finance or stuff like that, then you're going to go to the demon bishop, which is earthy, and you're going to say, who do I want for this? Okay, Mayron, who do I want for this? Which demon should I call up for it? So I think they are really great because people often, who would be the best spirit for this? You hear it so many times. I got this issue or this, that, or the other. Who should I call? You see it on forums all the time. Should I call this angel or that angel? Should I call this demon or that demon? Well, the demon bishops kind of take the guesswork out of it. Like, if you're going the infernal route, okay, this is a problem that you associate with these qualities. You call up that demon bishop, and you ask them to. And if they can't bring it straight away, you can always repeat the conjuration of the winds and get the winds to bring it to you in the same conjuration if need be. I mean, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of multiple spirit conjurations, but that might be an instance where it would be relevant, because you are calling the demon bishop more as an intermediary rather than as the main. You're calling them to ask them to bring the spirit to you.
Yeah, that's such a great point, David. And listeners, again, here's what's so cool is David in this book is giving, in Clavis Spirituum, is giving you effectively a template of an architecture of how to engage with spirits. Even if a spirit may just be tangentially touched on in the grimoires, it gives you the architecture of ways that you can have different associations, different ways of engaging with spirits. So I think that's lovely, David. And this brings up, speaking of modifications and speaking of really diving into things, let's talk about the pentacles, because this is a huge, huge part of the book as well. I think listeners are going to love it. It's chapter 5 in the book on talismans, seals, and more complex laments. But David, can you share with us, and again, listeners, you will get the full strokes in your own copy of the Clavis Spirituum. But David, I just love the updates that you've made, the incorporation of the Hebrew. You took in many instances the very famous pentacles that we all know and love from the Clavicula Salomonis, the Key of Solomon. But you also, can you tell us about what did you do with the excellent Psalm incorporations? And also, what did you do in terms of crafting your own pentacles? Here's an example. You share an example pentacle for business success. You share an example pentacle for healing broken or fractured bones. I mean, it seems like the pentacles are really, there's infinite possibilities. What would you like listeners to know about the great work you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, pentacles, I love the pentacles. They're one of my favorite and most common forms of stuff I do. I use pentacles a lot. And I say in the book in one place, well, 9 times out of 10, you can achieve what you need with a pentacle rather than having to go through a full conjuration sequence. So I'm a big fan of the pentacles, and for enduring long-lasting effects for things as well. So I thought, it's like the other things, why don't we expand on the repertoire and make more pentacles? So how would I do that? So it was, first thing is, I usually have the Psalm insipids. So I went through the Book of Psalms, all 150 Psalms, one by one, in Latin, translating it through, and I love this. This would be good for this. So there's a really long appendix of Psalm insipids, and with things that are more modern, relevant from the modern age as well. Then a second band, so it's like a 2-band circle with appropriate divine names. So and there's that appendix of all of those interesting divine names, all these names like God who heals and God who sees and God the sword and God who sanctifies, etc., etc. Then the center is where you get to be creative, really. The one I came up with for the business success. But we live in an internet and much more international world now. So for that one, it's like, I used the Psalm 79:12 as the outer band for this particular one. So extendit palmites suos esque ad mare, etusque ad flumen propaginis eos. It extended its new branches even to the sea and its new seedlings even to the river, which implies prosperity and spreading of success. So very appropriate for business success. Then the divine names, I put in the inner band, Yahweh Ezri, God my helper, and Yahweh Jireh, God will provide. So again, I think very appropriate divine names for business success. Then in the middle, I put an equal arm cross, 4 circles around the, with the equal arm, divided by the equal arm cross, so they kind of look like coins. And then starting with the top going round, I put the symbols yen, euro, dollar, pound, different international currencies. But if you read from the yen one down, then the letters they're based on, you actually get yes as well. Yen, the Y on the yen, the E on the euro, the S on the dollar, which again, affirmation because you want success. That sounds a bit new agey, but it's all about symbolism in this instance, And so nothing wrong with using modern symbolism as well, rather than it having to all be stuck in the past, because we are living in this time. So that was how I created my, my business success pentacle, just simple principle. So suitable Psalm incipit in the first band, the second band has divine names, and then you come up with something that's symbolically appropriate or inside. I mean, I gave that as an example because I wanted to show them that you can have a bit of fun with thinking about it, think outside of the box, and you don't just have to be restricted as, I must do like an old coin or something, that it can be a bit more up to date, like the bone one, the inside has like a Saturn symbol made of bones. So it's, and again, that has, Sane me domine quoniam contubata sunt ossa mea. Hear me, Lord, for my bones have become disturbed. Psalm 6:3. Again, if you had like breaks or fractures, your bones have definitely become disturbed. So it was a perfect incipit for, an issue like that. And for that, I used Yahweh Rapha, God who heals, and Adonai Haaretz, Lord of the earth, because bones are very much a solid thing, and you want them to be, solidified and healed. So, and they're off the earth. So I thought that was an appropriate one for it. So I go into, there's like huge list of Psalm incipits, which I give them all. But being now rather than hundreds of years ago, I footnoted with the Latin where there's differences. So because the Latin's normally, it's either me or it's he, whereas it can be, really it should be she, he, if it's third person, singular. So I've given the Latin, then the English. So I've translated as she, he, rather than just he. But I've also footnoted they, them, and, change the the different sort of gender alternatives. So it's not just on that straight he, she duality, and also we rather than I for people who are non-binary and don't necessarily identify. Because, again, it's why should we not be as accessible as possible with our magic? That's been a big thing for me with this book. And it's really not hard to offer the alternatives with the Latin so people can put it in a way that works for them, that is not going to jar them because actually I'm a they, them, I'm not a he or a she. So that Latin is not going to, I'm not going to feel it's going to flow properly for me magically if it doesn't match, So I did that with but there's also then just a list of different things you'd use the pentacle for, with which of the Salmon sippets to go to and suggested divine names to use with them. So I had a lot of fun doing that.
So, David, let me ask you this. So imagine right now there's a listener out there hearing this and they are thinking, I'm just getting into Solomonic magic. I just want to get, one ritual down or something like this. And David's saying this is like infinite possibilities and almost like decision paralysis or information overload. And no, I'm just going to stick with the ritual. Can you talk to that listener about how this is the beauty of Solomonic magic, that this is not a departure from Solomonic magic, but mixing and matching and dialing in. And if you have a broken bone and you would like business success, you can explore ways to combine and have pentacles that are specifically suited for your situation. Can you just talk about how that's part of the tradition, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely is that you are doing the thing, you're making it relevant for you. It is what you need. So rather than making something fit that's already there, it's completely dialing into your exact requirements. I mean, as a quick aside, one thing I did include in the book is one of the classical Mathers gives on pentacles. I think it's the fourth of the sun, the one for revealing, invisible hidden spirits. Because if you have never done conjuration before and you feel, I'm not very psychic, am I getting to see anything in the crystal? That you can make that pentacle as part of your preparation to show that if you're not seeing anything in the crystal, to show that to your crystal or the spirit to reveal itself so that you can then actually see it. There's a good example of using the pentacle in conjuration. Is let's not forget that they're not just for the two categories of protective and acquisitive magic, which pretty much every talisman is. It's either to protect you from something or for you to gain something. That you can use them in conjuration. You might choose to have a protective one if you're feeling nervous about working something, but the one for revealing invisible or hidden spirits is a perfect one to make and have there present for your first conjuration. If you are, feeling uncomfortable or uncertain about your psychic ability and your ability to engage with the spirit, because once you've got a physical visual with the spirit, the engagement will flow really easily.
Wonderful words of advice, and really encouraging too about don't be afraid to exactly jump in, think about the specific use, and not be afraid to draw on the tradition, draw on the nomina magica, draw on the specific planetary arrangements, but making it work for you. I just think, David, thank you for sharing that. One of the last questions I had about pentacles as well is, you do such a great job in the book laying out also how to consecrate a pentacle, but can you share with us, very interesting, deconsecrating pentacles, or when a pentacle has, say, served its purpose, and you would like to safely, remove any potencies or at least kind of put it in a safe state. Can you tell us any tips, broad strokes about deconsecrating or working with pentacles after they have fulfilled their use?
Well, you're going to have two sort of options here. One of them is whether the pentacle was made on metal, or if you've made it on like a nice card or vellum, as to how you go about it. Because if you made it on metal, you're expecting it to last a long time. The ones on vellum are a lot easier to deal with getting rid of. By and large, usually if you made a pentacle, like I say, it is for a long time. But if you do feel you need to get rid of it, then one's made of card, things, which I'm perfectly happy with. A lot of the ones I've made on good quality card, and they've worked great. There've not been any sort of degradation of the ability of the pentacle because it's not made on metal. You can like burn them and drop the ashes in a natural running water source, like a river. Preferably, it should be in the same planetary day and hour that it was created. Like if it was made in the first hour of the sun on a Sunday, that you would then also burn and dispose of it in that same timing. If you called on a spirit to assist with charging it, that when you're destroying it, that you thank them. You do just a simple thank you for their assistance, acknowledging that they assisted you with it and that any input they gave into it is no longer required. If you do have metal ones, then you've got to remove the design from your disc again during an appropriate planetary hour and day, and then you can recycle the metal. If it's something like gold, we might consider putting it in salt for a period of time to decharge it and reuse it again. If it's not 24 karat gold, it's going to corrode in salt, so don't do that. Don't go and bury them in the wilds because that's not necessarily going to be good for wildlife as well. It's always considering people just go and bury stuff willy-nilly. No, that's not very considerate. So yeah, that was another one of those things that came up when that was actually when I did a weekend workshop in April over in England, and somebody said to me, "So, say 6 years down the line, I've got this pentacle, I don't need it anymore. What do I do with it?" And I was like, "Great question. Got to put that in the book." There are numerous. There's literally dozens of footnotes in my book where I say thank you to so and so for asking this question or for this idea. I do credit people. I'm not just stealing people's ideas. I do acknowledge how much of what I put out there has been inspired by things other people have said, and that I've even if they just asked me a question which made me think and set me off on a whole tangent, I like to acknowledge the input that other people have in contributing to the end book that I write. I think that is a really important thing as an author and as a magician, that you do give people credit for things.
Oh, I think it's so great, David. And yes, the ability of you to solicit the opinions of practicing magicians, but also the lovely questions you get for not only the in-person conferences and workshops you give, but of course your classes, which listeners, those go very fast. So if you ever see a link to sign up for a David Rankine class, you need to be quick because they fill up extremely quickly. However, David, you were just talking about, and this is something in your book that listeners will love, practical tips. And let's talk about landscapes for a second, because practical landscapes, and we'll get into specifically something from the SSM that you have with setting of stones, but I want to jump back to something that I think many listeners are familiar with, and this is one of the many things about your book. You offer updates to things that are seen in the grimoires from hundreds of years ago that make total sense and that show fidelity to the tradition. So I will give you an example that you bring up, which is, let's say you're following the Key of Solomon, and you are looking to make a wand. And on the first sunrise, right, the day and hour of Wednesday, on the day of Mercury during a waxing moon, in one stroke, you find a specific tree or specific wood, whatever it is, and in one stroke, you cut off a virgin branch, and you are going to use that. Well, in the Key of Solomon, it just says, make this stroke, right? But what I love about what you do is you offer ways to heal trees, for example, and ways that you can actually work with the landscape. So I'll just open it up. What are some of the key things that that you think listeners might not have been aware of in terms of the landscapes and working with nature? What are some of the big things?
Okay, well, if you start with the one, I suppose because of what I've been involved with, different traditions and things in the past, there is that thing of treating animals and plants with respect. So yeah, that you approach a tree with respect, get a feeling of if it's going to be happy to make an offering to it as well. And part of that is that when you've made the strike, that you put some saliva on your fingers and shoot it over where you've taken the cut. So you're actually giving an offering of your life essence, as it were, from the saliva back to the tree for having taken that from it. Yes, there's nothing about that in the grimoires, but we have moved on from there, and I think that's very relevant that we think about these things now. Likewise, the landscape's an interesting thing because with planetary spirits, as I said, the lower astral does correspond to our physical landscape. So depending on what sort of spirit you're going for, if you're going to work outdoors, looking for a place that is going to be more harmonious for that spirit. If it's a lunar spirit, a place that's watery, so by a lake or at the seashore, for example. If it's mercurial, airy, then somewhere like on a hilltop, somewhere that's where you're getting the effects. Earthy ones, Saturn and Venus, obviously in the woods or on the mountains. Jupiter, you've got that sort of air, water duality with Jupiter, so you can go with either of those locations. Fire is a tricky one, of course, sun and moon, but fire stuff I always do in the day anyway when the sun's out, just because I think it's logical. Mars, for that there's the option of, for example, having a firebolt. You don't make a pit because you don't want to be digging holes in the landscape interfering with it, but a firebolt that's not going to do any damage to the environment that you're working in, and then an appropriate planetary wood of Mars. You could use fireball with other locations as well, and have appropriate planetary woods. But for Mars specifically, then suitable martial wood being burnt in an environment where there's no risk of damage to the place where you are, and that is key. You're going to be going somewhere where there's a chance that there are already spirits living there, in the corresponding environment. And, genius loci, the spirits of the place, they have a presence in our physical realm. Those are kind of spirits that don't just exist on the next level up, on the lower astral. They're literally the name, spirit of the place. They have a tangible link to that place, which means that you are in their home, in their backyard when you're doing it. So building up a relationship with the spirit of the place to get their permission to work in there. So I talk about that, and I talk about the things you do, like making offerings, things that are from the local ecology. You find out the sort of what the spirit might like, apples, nuts, whatever, offerings they might like, milk and honey. But then if it's milk and honey, milk from local cows, honey from local bees, you don't get stuff that's been transported from halfway around the world, because that's not something that's local to that ecology of the place where you are. There should be things that are local from a local farmer's market, or if there isn't one, maybe at our food shop, so that when the animals in the environment consume it, it's something that is not going to harm them as well. And having a spirit feast when you do the actual conjuration as a thank you to that spirit, to the genius loci, for letting you do, that, like I say, that spirit in that conjuration in their backyard. So yeah, I do talk a lot about finding an appropriate place and then developing a relationship with it. And also, if you do develop a relationship with spirits of place like genius loci, you can learn all sorts of stuff from them as well. Yeah. The grimoire conjurations all came from somewhere, the grimoire practices, and by and large spirit-led. if the spirits hadn't talked to people, they wouldn't have known what to do. So it all starts somewhere, and working with those spirits, which have a very strong physical presence here, more so than your angels or your demons, can be really valuable, and you can learn an awful lot from working with spirits like G, the slow guy. So I'm very, keen to encourage people to bear that in mind as well. If you do find a good place to work at, then you can even just go and work with them as well. But the spirit piece, I talk about that and making that offering. But when I was going through Summa Sacra Magicae, some of the stuff that hasn't been translated, hasn't been published yet, there was a bit that struck me where it talks about the stone and writing things on a stone. And I thought, if you went to the place and you get the permission of the spirits to take away 5 stones, you have something then which has an actual physical connection to your landscape. Then sort of paint names on the stones, appropriate names. And then when you lay down your cloth or your liner, whatever your circle is made of, rather than just imposing it onto the landscape, that you kind of temporarily embed it or connect it to that landscape by, you go into a magic circle, you lie down, arms out and across, pour the stones at your feet, top of your head, where your hands are, and you put the 5th one on your heart, and do a little visualization and a little speech with that. And then afterwards, put the 4 that were marked to your body, like the hands, head, and toe, at the different points of the circle outside, and leave that one that was above your heart in the center of the circle. And then you have set your circle into the environment rather than imposing it on the environment. And afterwards, if you're going to work there again, then you might take the stones with you. If you don't plan on it, you should clean, when you take them away, clean off the divine names, deconsecrate it, return them to the site that it came from, again, being respectful. But if you're planning on working there in future, then you have those stones then good to go. And I do give the consecration for the stones, obviously, with the additional consecration section that I sort of put in at the end of the book. But we really need to think about spirit ecologies and what we are doing when we're working outdoors with regard to the spirits of the place, but also the flora and fauna, the animals, the plants of the place.
Yes, I think that's so wonderful. And the fact that, spirits are not just found in a register of grimoires, that you can find in your local area, your genius loci, these spirits of the forest and of the rivers and appropriate offerings. I think that's so wonderful, David. Thank you for sharing that. Again, listeners, this is such a great template, but also historical connection to the tradition, bringing it into the 21st century. That's one of the great things that David's Clavis Spirituum is doing. Also, as well, David, too, you are always pushing the boundaries to think about things that are not touched on directly in the grimoires. One of those, I'd love to hear and we were chatting about this a little bit before, your conversations with Craig Slee and accessibility and mobility, I think, are one of the greatest things about different ways to think about whoever you are as a practitioner, whatever situation, whether you're in the forest or whether you're by the ocean or whatever your own situation is, you really do solicit input on bringing it into the 21st century. So can you share a little bit about the importance of accessibility, mobility, and just how you are, again, updating a lot of the grimoire material?
A while back, just as I started putting the material together for Clavis Spiritum, I got an email from a gentleman. It was quite a long email, and he introduced himself, explained he was going to be doing a conjuration from Dars Garisha, and he was in a wheelchair, mild cerebral palsy, had a couple of assistants. It will be his first conjuration, and could I make any suggestions for him? So I wrote him a long email about suggestions I would make, regarding where people would do bits for him, which bits if there were bits he didn't feel he could easily do, that somebody else could do that bit for him, but maximizing what he did. And after I wrote that, I thought there is not nearly enough conversation going on about people with sensory or physical issues in magic. I felt a little bit embarrassed because I spent 6 years working as a carer for people with learning disabilities, and I was dealing with people in wheelchairs and hoists and things pretty much every day. But it's that thing that if it's not an immediate part of your world, you tend to not really think about it or pay much attention to it. So I really need to do a chapter on this and stress it being really looking at what the person feels they can do and working around that. I mean, because things like if somebody has sight issues, are they moderate or severe? For example, because if they're moderate, it might just work to have the stuff written very large for them to read. If somebody is blind, it's going to be difficult for them to do conjuration unless you can get the conjuration put into braille or that they memorize. And if they have good memory, and then maybe that you did the conjurations or prayers on like a call respond, where they learnt like half of it, and the second person they would do call and respond, and that might work for them. It was looking at the different things like that. You have again with hearing, if someone has hearing issues, if they've got hearing aids, they'll be able to hear. But if there's a problem there, perhaps using like musical instruments like a bell or things to mark different phases, because that then the vibration effect from that can still be, or also hand signals to show the person your turn to do this bit. But really just trying to accommodate the person as to they do the maximum they can do, not you're in a wheelchair, so you should just be the scryer. There's no reason why that person in a wheelchair shouldn't be the conjurer. People in that situation get enough conscious and unconscious prejudice every day of their life without needing it in a magic circle as well, So I wrote a section on that, and I sent it to Craigsley. I said, obviously I don't have any disabilities, and I don't want to be insensitive. Can you have a look through and tell me if you think what I'm doing is okay and suitable and covers the points? And he was happy with what I'd done, so I was pleased about that, because like I say, I'm writing in that instance from an outside perspective, and I'm trying to offer my thoughts really as a way to just, because I want to try and make that dialogue more public, because it is something that does get glossed over, not just in the grimoire world, but I think generally in magic, that it's like this invisible people. Like how often at events do you see people with disabilities? Not very often. And is that because they're not interested, or because they wouldn't feel welcome, or there's no consideration given to them? So I wrote a whole section on that about looking at accessibility and trying to hopefully make people think more about that and talk more about it publicly, because like I say, I thought, God, I've been as guilty as other people. I'm not claiming innocence here, because it wasn't part of my immediate experience. I wasn't really considering it. So no, I thanked that person, and that is in the acknowledgements, for writing that letter to me, because you need sometimes for someone to say something, or someone like to come into your view to make you stop and think. So I was very glad that he did. And like I say, it inspired me to put that in because for me, the grimoire tradition is not a place for prejudice. I think the grimoire tradition is actually very inclusive. And I that inclusivity should be spread fully. The only reason not to do it, I would say, is if you have, serious mental health issues, then it's probably not a good idea. But, that aside, for pretty much anyone else, there is no reason why, they can't do grimoire conjuration.
I totally agree. And David, exactly. I am just as guilty of just not being aware and not assuming something. And then once you hear about it, it's like, oh my goodness, exactly. That person who wrote you the letter, you talking with Craig Slee, who is wonderful. Craig's great. And then having those insights and you able to synthesize those, again, I think that is exactly what we need. It warms my heart, just, having that focus and that reminder of something that's vital, which is inclusivity. So yes, again, listeners, this is one of the great things you'll appreciate about Clavis Spirituum, because the facets that David covers is just really, really high quality and needed for 21st century practice. David, one of the things too that I definitely would like to get into, speaking of the precision of language, is, I believe this is chapter 12 in your book, phrasing your requests, pacts, and offerings. This really is something where I was, it's one of those things when you read it, you realize how vital this is. And you say, quote, I'll just give a little sample here. You say, quote, "When it comes to engaging with spirits, precision in your language is absolutely essential. This applies to both requests you make for tasks to be fulfilled and in the event of making a pact or a contract with a spirit. A spirit will only agree, you say, to a pact/contract if it gets something out of it as you do. So it should be entered into as a symbiotic contract." Now, David, I know listeners are out there saying, oh, yes, I know pacts are important and phrasing is important. And of course, and I do that, I try and have accurate language, but you really go into detail as to what is a pact, what is a contract, what is an offering, what does it mean to break a contract or a pact? How can you de-escalate if for some reason you cannot meet your fulfillments? There are so many things here that reading it, I was like, wow, how many key reminders are here? So David, what is a pact, and what do you think are like some of the big things, the 3 or 4 big things that people might not usually think about when it comes to a pact?
There's a kind of confusional thing here is with pact and contract. That the terms have kind of been used interchangeably. I tend to think of contract as a long-term thing, as the English sign. Pact, but people often talk about they make a pact to get a spirit to do something. But if you're just getting it to do one thing, that's not a pact. A pact, in fact, pact and contract really are kind of like both being used for the same thing, which is a long-term relationship with a spirit. But so, like I say, sometimes people say, "Oh, I did a pact to get this happen." Well, if that's it, and you're not working with that spirit again, that wasn't a pact. That was an arrangement. And it's the critical things for me are, you can never break your word when you have a pact. The things that you have agreed to do, like with, for example, offerings with particular things, because you break your word to a spirit. Not only have you made the pact or contract null and void, but you just kind of outed yourself as an oath breaker in the world of spirits. So you can likewise expect that other spirits might not be willing to deal with you in future because you have demonstrated a lack of integrity and that they can't necessarily trust you. But I really stress the precision thing because you've got to think about, sometimes things happen beyond your control. So it's like my example I give, rather than saying, this is an extreme example, but rather than saying, I will offer you a bottle of red wine each full moon, it would be far better to say, unless I am prevented by illness or extreme circumstances beyond my control, I will offer you a bottle of red wine each full moon at the location where I am. And in the event of illness or extreme circumstances preventing me, I will offer it at the same time on the next day I am well enough or not otherwise incapacitated by events. I mean, that's a bit like the language you see in conjurations. It's like that legalese, as it were, of setting the boundaries, saying, I'll do it every full moon, then you're sick. Okay, it's unfortunate you were sick, and you don't do it, but you've just broken your contract. You've just broken your pact. By including in that thing, unless I'm prevented by illness or extreme circumstances beyond my control. So then the spirit goes, okay, they were ill and couldn't do it, or, their car got hit and they couldn't get home and they couldn't do it. So fair enough. As soon as you can do it, you do it. You fulfill. You have given yourself the wiggle room to fulfill your obligation and not, break your word. So I think it's critical that you look at wording with any spirit agreement, with any task, but particularly with like contracts that, and what you are offering to them and when. Another thing that's important that I talked about is timing, giving like a realistic time frame for a task, for spirit to complete a task in. A lunar month is quite a common time that people do, but some tasks might take longer. Some you might need a quicker result in, and you have to specify how long, with exact wording the spirit is to do it in. And then if the spirit doesn't do it in that time, the spirit has broken the contract or the deal, not you. So there's no backlash on you. Although it's obviously disappointing if it doesn't achieve the spirit for you and the task for you. But if a spirit, if you had a written pact and spirit failed to agree the task, then you burn the pact and dispose of the ashes at crossroads. I do talk in there as well about how to deal with ending a pact. I give like creating a spirit contract and like a template, but also ending a spirit contract, because again, a question I was asked by somebody, like, so what do you do if it's no longer useful anymore? And it's like, oh, that's a good question. I'm not in that position because the packs I have running are all ones that have been going for a long time that I still benefit from. So I've not actually ended any of my packs. But what would I do? So then I would do this. So that's why the phraseology, I put say something like, I'm giving an example. It's not so, this is a rare instance of me putting something in that I have not actually practiced and got other people to test. This is like, that's why I suggest it's done in an X-Basic Magic Circle, blah, blah. You can tell from my wording, if you read that, you will see by the way I've written it. I think I'm making it very clear that I'm suggesting this as a way to do it, because I think, again, it's a topic that should be covered and nobody talks about how would you end a pact. So I go into the details of how I do that. The template, I do use the old God Who Sanctifies in there again, of course, because it's just such a great thing to put in documents. Give a historical example and show how a lot of that's not really that relevant. And how you create a contract using magical ink and pen on consecrated paper or vellum that you made beforehand in appropriate times. Worth having a couple of extra sheets prepared in case you make mistakes. But, you write it out. You write the name of the spirit in red ink, the rest of the contract in black. When you've finished writing it, you leave it unsigned, consecrate it. And that then is offered in when you're doing the pact. And when you get affirmation from the spirit that it accepts it, you then write its seal and you write your own, you write your own name in there as well. I talk about that as well. there's this lovely idea that, you would put the contract out there on the tip of your sword and the spirit would sign it. But in reality, they are there in the first heaven on the lower asteroid. They're not on the physical plane. So, they're not going to neatly, have like ink suddenly appear out of nowhere and sign it, or you have to sign it with their agreement for them with their seal. But I mean, it's important to, the contract and pact thing and the phrasing. I was shocked when I thought this is stuff that is so important to talk about, and yet it's one of those things that people don't talk about nearly enough. I mean, I think half of the book is probably me going, "Oh my God, I think people need to talk about this more." But I got a lot of it is stuff that comes from doing stuff over a period of decades, where it can be things that you take for granted. They become part of your practice. But then when someone else who's new to it asks you, you're like, "Oh yeah, that's why these courses and things have been so great for me." And I've learned a lot from them, because it makes me realize I have to think about how I do stuff, how I phrase it, and explain it to people. So, I learn from when I'm teaching people. I'm sort of learning from them as well, because they are, making things fresh again for me, making me question how I look at things, seeing if I could, in some instances, can sort of come up with like a better way of doing something because of the question. And I mean, that's the joy of when you're teaching stuff. It's like that you're learning with the people that you're teaching. It's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. If it's not a two-way street, you're doing something wrong. And the question about how do you get rid of the contract was one like, "Oh yeah, I'm so glad you asked." Now I've got to go away and look at that and exactly what would I do.
That is one of the most rejuvenating things about your book is it's all of the decades and decades of trial and error and experience that you've had inside the circle and outside, and bringing it back in to saying, "Hey, here it is explicitly," just naming it. In fact, David, speaking of pacts, one of the things I love, and this goes exactly to your point about you showing fidelity to the tradition. I'll just read these few sentences here, but you say, quote, and I'd love your thoughts if you could elaborate on this. "If you are considering making a spirit contract with a spirit, I would strongly recommend conjuring the spirit first and seeing if the spirit, makes suggestions when asked for easier future contact. A number of grimoires suggest the first conjuration merely being to bind the spirit and not request anything. In this day and age," you say, "bind does not have to have the old context and can be seen as initial engagement to open the relationship," end quote. So can you talk about this where, some people think, a spirit for wealth. I've never spoken to the spirit before. I'm just going to conjure it and just ask it to do something related to business growth or wealth. But you point out that many grimoires say, hey, the very, very, very first time that you do contact a spirit, it's about those initial terms and conditions, if you will. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I talk about a lot. Is that there's a whole big thing on offerings that I've done, as you know. The incense or the fragrance incense or oil that you burn is like the initial meeting fee. That shouldn't be taken as the absolute, but that's all that you're going to be giving. It may be that you do give more incense than that is sufficient, but if you want a bigger task, there is a whole selection. I talk about the different things there, like different sorts of alcohol, alms, some spirits liking time or money given to charity, artistic endeavors of making things, carvings, drawings, paintings, poetry, sculpture, all sorts, coins, flowers, food, fragrances. There's like a whole light, plants. There's a whole range of things that come in as like possible offerings to be made. So it really is not just that simple thing necessarily of here's some incense, now do this job for me. It's like, no, here's the incense, now I've turned up. Now let's talk terms. And like I said, there is that thing of that you just found it, and then so it would come next time. But the way we, I suppose, look at that now is like, well, okay, if I'm not asking anything specific now, I should at least ask it how to make the process easier for us, for both of us next time. So things, can it be a shorter purification time? Is there another scent that it would prefer? Are these the best timings for it? Is there particular prayers or anything it would like? Are there any particular hand gestures that it would like? Is this the best environment for it? There's a whole thing there of like, so that you can be, then you're super dialed in next time with that spirit. And is it the right spirit for the task? Of course, a really important one not to forget. It might be, and going back to the thing, that's why I like the demon bishops. It's like, who's the best spirit for the job? You might think so and so that you've conjured is the best spirit for the job, but they might not be. There might be, other spirit that would actually do that job a lot better for you. So, yeah, there is a lot to think about with regard to the offerings. I've also, we'll probably get there shortly, with the conjuration sequence. I kind of revised that so that the fragrance gets offered also to the winds with your breath, so that you are making literally that offering of your breath of life to the winds as part of the conjuration of the winds. Again, it's like that respect thing, because you're asking the winds to go and bring spirit to you. So you offer them a bit of the fragrance. It gets burnt, but you also offer them a bit of your breath, which is not in the grimoire. That's not in the SSM. That was just me going, I think this is a light, and me checking with Joffel when I was questioning him on the changes I've made, and him agreeing it was a good inclusion, because it's back to the whole thing of like, if you constantly are behaving in a courteous and respectful way, and the spirits see that you keep your word and you have integrity, you're going to have a much better success rate in them turning up, but B, you're going to have a much better success rate in them achieving the things you ask them to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, because they see that you are, a person of your word and a person who is seeking to improve the world.
Yeah.
Which I think is a key thing for spirits as well. And that's the reason why things like the Arbiter talk about, spirits liking people being pious and, the alms giving and contributing to the community, is that it's about the interconnectedness of everything. I think spirits are much more aware of the interconnectedness of everything than we are. And I was talking to somebody about this morning, actually. It's the old, one of the sayings that Friends of the Earth have of think global, act local, and that you, as a magician, you act local, but you are sort of emanating and trying to improve the environment around you in various different ways. And the more people do that, the more it spreads. Like, it's like having a sheet of tissue paper and dropping ink on it, and the ink spreads. And the more people are doing that, until eventually the whole thing is coloured. That's the only way magic will affect change in the physical world, if we want to try and make the world a better place. And from what I'm hearing from the spirits I work with, the spirits are very keen to have more engagement with people to try and improve things, because I think we are, heading into a very dangerous period of time, for Earth, for humans on Earth in the coming years. And certainly the spirits seem to think so as well. So they are very keen for more contact with people, and that contact also then kind of has the predilection of encouraging people to be better and trying to move that balance into the right direction.
David, you bring up a great point, because one of the main themes throughout your book, showing fidelity to the tradition, the Solomonic tradition, but updating it to the 21st century. One of the key things that you do is you have a revisitation of the full conjuration sequence. What many listeners might be familiar with is the 6-step Solomonic method, which obviously is expanded now and has a lot more context. So can you tell us a little bit about the revisited conjuration sequence and how this sequence is not a new thing? This actually goes back about 2,000 years at least. Can you share a little bit about this?
Yeah, I mean, while I was working on this, one of my favorite texts is Sefer Harazim, the Book of Mysteries, which goes back to about the 5th century CE, which I think is like the original proto-grimoire, really, the way stuff is covered in there. And this is part of the whole thing with Seat of Shamayim, is that, if I can quote from it, it says, "The name of the first firmament is called Shamayim. Within it are encampments filled with wrath, and 7 thrones are appeared there, and upon them are seated overseers, and around them on all sides encampments of angels are stationed, and are obedient to men at the time where they practice magic, to everyone who has learned to stand and pour libations in their names, and cite them by their signs at the period when prayer is heard, so as to make a magical rite succeed." I mean, it's a description of grimoire conjuration. You've got your encampments obedient at the time when they practice magic, timing, stand and pour libations in their name, making offerings to them, and cite them by their signs, your magical symbols, your sigils, at the period when prayer is heard, to make a magical rite succeed. I mean, that was just like, Sefer Harazim is such a great text. And also, I mean, I love the fact with it that you have these angels of wrath and angels to kill people and stuff. And a lot of the qualities associated with those angels in Sefer Harazim, I talk about this in chapter 3, are the ones that later on get associated with demons. And likewise, a lot of the qualities associated with the daemones that then become called demons are ones that are more associated with angels. It's all a matter of terminology and timing and context when you're dealing with different spirits, which is why I often tend to dislike the term spirit or spiritual being, rather than putting the divisions on them, because over time it varies a lot. And also, in that same bit in Sefer Harazim, "And without permission, the angels who serve them do not go out to engage in magical actions. They wait until a command comes to them from one of the 7 overseers, the occupants of the thrones who rule over them." And that whole thing about 7 thrones, I'm not saying it's the same as the 7 sedes that we see in SSM and elsewhere, but I find it really interesting that it's back to this planetary 7. You have these 7 thrones, 7 encampments. It's such a recurring theme. I mean, it's an interesting parallel, that you have the 7 sedes in Tartarus. Then you have like this, these 7 thrones in Shamayim. So yeah, that was like really, really, really sort of got me thinking on that one. Obviously, the license to remain is still there. What I have done this time in the revised sequence, it's a lot longer because I've put notes in at the end of each section. Well, I divided it into the sections, and I put like comments and expansions on things. Even things like, the distance that you place the triangle from your circle, like the practicality of it, or to your triangle or circle that you've got your crystal mirror in. Because, we're seeing the grimoire says at least 2 foot away. But I recommend like a foot max, because if you've got a 3-band circle, those bands are going to take up at least a foot, possibly a 1.5 foot if each band is 6 inches. That's a 1.5 foot between the innermost circle where you can be and the outside of the circle. You then have a bit more space, and then you have the circle or triangle. So if, for example, you are using the sword to touch something to your crystal in there, your sword blade's going to need to be 3 foot blade. If you had if it was a 2 foot cap, then it's going to need to be a bigger blade, which is probably bigger than most people would have as their sword blade. So, it's the thing about thinking about practicalities. Likewise, just the sword itself, when you sheath it, having like a frog, like a device that you can just slide it into, because there's times in the ritual, obviously, you don't have a sword in your hand. You don't want to have it lying loose, so having something that you can actually sheath it into. Scabbards can be a bit, floppy around the place. I personally like the having like the frog to sheath the sword in, as they said, talking. So just note, at this point you can sheath the sword, things like this, just adding in all these little bits. Obviously, that you work, if you're outdoors, that you do making the feast offering to the spirits of the place before you start doing anything. So I've given stuff in for that. Then the whole activating the crystal and triangle. Now, there are places where I've added bits in that aren't from the grimoires, particularly taken from the Song of Solomon, because I love the Song of Solomon. And I would say these are not absolutely essential additions. They're added because I think they're beautiful. And I think beautiful poetic language adds to a conjuration. It adds to the experience. It adds to the mood. It can transform a mood. A few words can transform the mood in a ritual. So adding words that bring beauty in. So, for example, I have added in for the anointing of the crystal, line from Song of Solomon, open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is wet with dew, my locks with the drops of night. So you're saying the open to me, my sister, literally open the crystal as a gateway, but also the dove, my love, my dove, my perfect one. It's the Shekinah. The Song of Solomon is a love, duet between God and Shekinah, between Yahweh and Shekinah. So for me, I felt it was entirely appropriate to add in, where relevant, lines from Song of Solomon, which to me, like I say, add this feeling of the beauty of in the dynamic. So I talk all about, there's quite a lot all about Seat of Shamayim and stuff, not surprisingly, the visualization that you do, activating the circle on entering. Actually, I have added a bit into there, inspired by you, from conversation that we had, that when you do the inner band, when you do the visualization on the inner band, the final circle, inner circle, of actually saying either Latin, for the Latin I've said, but I think I'll say it in English, I surround myself with the virtue of these names with which this circle is sealed, from Clavis Inferni. So when you told me about you using that in your practice, that's so good. I'm having that. I'm going to incorporate that in my practice. And so, that became something that I've included in the activation of the magic circle. And, I have you to thank for that, because it works so well. It's perfect timing, because you are literally sealing the circle with you're visualizing the white fire, and it's the virtue of those names. You have just spoken all those divine names that are in the circle. Important point. I'm not sure if I made it in the previous in Intelligentiarum, but certainly I've stressed it here, that when you are activating the circle, when you've got like the Hebrew, like the first 7-4 of Adam and divine names, because Hebrew's written right to left, you go anti-clockwise around the circle. You don't go clockwise, you go anti-clockwise, because you're vibrating it as you're, right, marking your tip in the air just above. And that some people, if they come from a pagan background, might be like, ooh, anti-clockwise, widdershins, negative, banishing stuff. It's like, no, this is from a different source. It specifically states in Summa Sacra Magicae, if you are working the Hebrew and Arabic, you go right to left. If you're working Greek and Latin, you go left to right. It talks, those four are all mentioned and talked about. Those roots of the grimoires are all talked about in Summa Sacra Magicae. And he gives like a table of the 4 languages and things like this in there. So, we have clear precedent there. about that thing of the direction that you go. I also make the point with visualization as well, because when you consecrate something like a sword, it has an aura about it. So it's that whole thing of that you don't need to touch the tip of the sword to your cloth or lino and risk damaging it, because there is an aura around your sword. So you can have it like an inch or so above the name and the circle that you are tracing. So just talking about the practicalities of these things, and it's sort of why, that you are using visualization as part of the process, which I've always thought wasn't there in the grimoires. And then there's an interesting bit in later part of Summa Sacra Magicae, which it says folio 401, which hasn't been published at this point. It says, "And surround yourself with the divine light, the name of the character, and divine words make your circle with the sword." Let's talk about the magic circle. Surround yourself with the divine light sounds a lot like visualization to me. While you are using the name of the character and the divine words and making the circle with the sword, to me, that sounds like the magician is visualizing. Maybe I'm wrong. That is speculation on my part. And I do say, it's intriguing and it's a speculation. Whilst acknowledging this is speculation on my part, if this is the case, we've restored rather than introduced visualization as part of the tradition. But I do make it clear. It's a speculation on my part, because when I read that, when I was doing a bit of editing on it, it literally, hit me in the face off the page. Hang on, surround yourself with the divine light, because what else can that be? I don't see what else it can actually really describe apart from that the magician is visualizing. So, yeah, that's interesting, because that would be like a pretty much unique reference to the idea of visualization in grimoire stuff right back in the early days in the SSM. Maybe it isn't. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Like I say, I don't know everything. I make mistakes like anybody else. So, but I put that in there just because it was so fascinating. If it isn't the case that myself and other people have added, visualization into the tradition in modern days, but there may have been it being done by some people back in the past. The rest, I think, carries on initially the same, but when the incense is being offered, there I've added in a petition to the winds, carry the fragrance, which again is from the Song of Solomon. The first part of it is, I say, "Awake north wind and come south wind, blow on my garden that its fragrance may spread everywhere." Because literally, that line from the Song of Solomon suggesting that the winds make the fragrance spread everywhere is exactly what we're talking about with the winds carrying the fragrance with your words of prayer and conjuration on to the spirits. Then I added in, "Accept these offerings of breath and fragrance for your assistance," and then that you blow then onto the censer or the evaporating oil water mix, and you're offering your breath of life to the wind. Then adding in an extra little bit there where you offer the fragrance to the spirits in the hierarchy as well. Because normally people just, I'm just going to do a prayer to this archangel and ask him to bring this angel or this intelligence or what have you, but I'm not going to give him anything. So, I thought, what, we should really be offering some of the fragrance to them as well. So I went to one of the nice sources, Swan Book of Honorius, Swan Book, an SSM, which contains Swan Book, have so many great bits in them. It's such a great resource. And I took a piece from that, which I adapted very slightly, where you actually offer the fragrance to the archangel and the conjured spirit. So it's like archangel name, conjured spirit name, or if you were doing the demon bishop, for example, then it would be demon king, demon bishop name. And then spiritual, I really like, peace conquers, service subdues, tolerance overcomes, humility nurtures harmony. Therefore I, name, child of mother's name and father's name, give my peace to you with humility. With tolerance, I bring this gift to you, that you being pacified, tolerant, and your complaints appeased, that you will kindly grant the petitions which by God's grace and glory I shall ask of you. You are making a polite request, entreating the spirit to come and the spirit above it to ensure it comes, and you are identifying yourself. You say your name, but you also say your parents' names. You sort of giving your lineage. It's only just struck me there that if somebody was adopted, they might not know. But in that instance, I think they would still give their mother and father's name because they're the people who raised them, even if they are not the actual blood relatives. I think the spirits would still take them as being the mother and father. I just love that line there, the peace conquers, service subdues, tolerance overcomes, humility nurtures harmony, because it's so many of the things that are important to being a virtuous magician emphasized in there. So I added that in. Everybody, an actual thing for everyone in circle actually being suffumigated, so words to say rather than just doing it. Did I? This is actually from one of the versions of the Heptameron, so you'll probably be pretty familiar with it, I think. Alexander, accept, O Lord, the sanctity of this scent, the scent of this fragrance, and send your heavenly virtue over us, that we may be able to fulfill our desires, and for the high praise of your sacred name for all ages of ages. Amen.
Yes, absolutely. VRL 1115. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, if there's, like I said, I love the tradition, and I love to be faithful to it when there's good stuff that does the job. I just add in extra bits for the flow, or when I think things need to be updated. When that beauty is already there and doesn't need anything doing to it, I only change stuff that needs changing. If it doesn't need changing, then there's no, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Absolutely. And, the modifications that you make with some of the prayers, I think listeners, if you have, many of David Rankine and Dr. Skinner's previous books, like the Anua Magica Reserata, you, for instance, right before the Shekinah prayer, have straight out of the Rudian 9 keys, right? Oh, almighty, immortal, immense, incomprehensible, and most high God, the only creator of heaven and earth, who by thy word alone hast, which goes on for 2.5, 3 pages. It's a beautiful prayer, consecratio Dei to the Father, but you also modify that a little bit. You kind of add in some other things as well, right? Like there are little tweaks that you make to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I added a bit it's actually from John 7:38 into the asperging, because again, so it says, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. I thought it was a really nice, and it's the whole thing of living water as well, because you will have collected that holy water from living water, like a stream or a river or something. It is living water. So again, you are making that connection of the living water from where you gathered your holy water from, with that point in the ritual where you are making that offering from your heart, in the purifying of the place. So yeah, talk about then the preparing the participants. I've actually added in an anointing thing. I'm not going to give it all away to people now, but there's an anointing thing which takes lines from things like the wedding hymn with the Acts of Thomas and the Book of Mirrors and John again, which for the people who have tried it really liked it. There's the purification of the scryer as well as before. The prayers, as you say, I've taken that one and adapted it from January Magica Reserata. Just a little tweak. But it's great. I love it because the whole way it's done, it's talking about the the crystal in that prayer. That's one of the reasons I like it. And it's like it gives an added blessing onto the crystal, onto that sort of portal of engagement with the spirit to further boost that and like the power of that connection there. Yeah, and the prayer of the Shekinah, which I adore, is amazing lines in it. It's quite stunning. I'll let people discover that for themselves. And you can say, hierarchical prayers, conjuration of the winds. There are, say, quite a lot of extra little bits of notes and things, like the winds thing. I talk about the different thing of the directions. When vibrating or singing, as one magician was moved to, the string of divine names, you may experience a tangible feeling, the burden of magical momentum. I experience this, and others also report it as definitely a very strong energetic impulse, the string of divine names. This impulse is part of reading or reciting names, as it's a complex sequence. Reading the conjuration as these circumambulates slowly is recommended. And again, I did sort of talk about, rehearsing, practicing stuff so that you don't stumble over it. I think that's the important thing for people to remember. Then you actually your conjuration, testing of alchemy and spirit. Again, that's the same. Engaging, license to depart, and putting. Now, one thing that I did add in, because I talked about, if asking for familiar spirits and things in Claves and Tangential Arum, something hit me like a brick of how obvious it was that it should be there, and I've not heard anyone do it, and I haven't done it either, and I kicked myself when I thought of this. I put an appendix in the book of like the name, the English letters and the Hebrew letters that they can transliterate to. So like, A normally translates to Aleph, can also translate to Ayin. I thought, you ask a spirit for a name, you ask them, say, okay, this spirit and what, and you get told this is its name. And then I've said, well, like you do your camera, you work out what you think it is, and you draw the scene and says this it. Well, the obvious thing that hit me was, you work out what you think it is in Hebrew, you add up the value, then you say, is this number the numerical equivalent of this spirit's name? And if they say yes, you put it right, you draw the cameo, you draw the sigil on the cameo and go, and is it its seal? And they'll say yes. If they say no, then you say, what is the numerical equivalent of its name? And then the difference between what you have and what they give you, it should then be easy to work out. So, for example, if it was an A rather than an Aleph, that's going to be an extra 69 on the total. If it's, for example, Vav instead of, so O is usually A and it can be a Vav. So if it's a Vav instead of A in, it'll be minus 64 because Vav has a value of 6, A in has a value of 70. So those things gave a little table of what numerical differences would be for this, if it's the different letters transliterated, the ones that are less common. That should then make it much easier to accurately get the name of the spirit and do the seal for it on the cameo. Oh God, that is so obvious. Ask, is it the right numerical equivalent? If it is, you're there. If it's not, ask what the number is and adjust accordingly. And I'm sure somebody's thinking, well, yeah, but how do you know that they're going to give you it in Hebrew? Well, Hebrew is the default language that the spirits and grimoire magicians engage in. So it's kind of understood that we're doing it on the cameos, which are done with Hebrew. So that's why. Because I know young me would have probably asked that. How do you know it's Hebrew? And yeah, I thought, God, that is so obvious. I've I've always just gone to, is this right? Yes, or in a couple of instances, no. Okay, so I could have just got around all of that by just pointing out the whole thing about precision. Even I wasn't precise enough there. Now I've had that insight. Although I've got to admit, it's a long time since I asked for. It's like several decades since I was like, I need a spirit for this, and they give me one and say its name is. So I don't feel quite as bad about that. But since I haven't done it for a long time, I hadn't thought about it. But then it suddenly hit me. This is a way to simplify the process for people, particularly if you're failing into conjuration and you do ask for a familiar spirit for particular tasks. That's so obvious.
Trust me, David, if you are saying that so obvious, let me tell you, I know 99.999% of people like me are so thankful for it because you're really illuminating it and pointing it out. And that's such a great point. Speaking of the Kameyas as well, another great update you did. So listeners, I know you're familiar. So in Clavis Intelligentiarum, David went back and corrected Agrippa's planetary Kameyas, meaning specific ways the lines are drawn and specific, a double loop or a sharp angle. David really went there. Well, David, I'd love for you to share with listeners, in addition to that, for the archangel sigils. Many listeners are familiar from the Heptameron, for example, the sigil of Gabriel or Michael or Raphael or Sachiel or Zadkiel. And what you did, can you share a little bit about this? You said, okay, those are great. Those are classic, tried and true angelic sigils. But if you have an 8x8 square and you have Raphael, for example, as the archangel of Mercury, can you share about what you did where you actually took the gematria value and you actually created a Kameya version of Raphael's sigil? Yes, please.
Yeah, I went through. It's like, I did this a while back and I've kind of added to it slightly this time because it's so obvious. If it works for all the planetary angels, why are we just doing the intelligences? I also added the ones for the spirits corrected from Agrippa in the appendix as well. And just for more fun, obviously there are times where archangels, for example, sometimes you'll see it referred to as Cassiel and other times it's Zachiel as your archangel of Saturn. So I did them for both. Likewise, Camael and Samael, both archangels of Mars. I did both. It was just one of those things. Like, why has nobody used the system, which is specifically for working with planetary spirits, because you're drawing the name on the Hebrew, on the camera, on the magic square. Why has nobody done that? I did reproduce them before some years back in the Llewellyn book of ceremonial magic. I did sectional planetary magic in that, and I think I put them in there. But apart from that, and now here, I'm not aware of anybody having done it with them. And it's a really, really obvious thing to do. So yeah, I put those in the appendix. Popped in the planetary seals, Olympic spirit ones, obviously, the Demon King ones, the nice ones from Clavis Inferni. I thought they were the only ones, the Demon King ones from Clavis Inferni. But then there's a set in Clue 89, Sub 38 in the Medici Library. But they're really ugly, and they don't have that lovely symmetry and cleanness to them that the ones in Clavis Inferni have. So went with them. And then, added in the conjurations. Obviously, there's the Olympic Spirit conjuration and the Demon Bishop conjurations. Because the Olympic Spirits and the Demon Bishops are the two main groups of spirits that Clavis Spiritum focuses on. Also, the prayers that you would do. Now, I brought back the prayers. I didn't want to repeat too much stuff from Clavis Intelligentiarum because I wanted this to build on it. But what I did do was redo the the prayers, but also this time, like where you'd use them. For example, the Cassial, Saturnian Archangel prayer. So, and notes are used with Order of Thrones, named Saturnian Planetary Angels, Zodiac Angels of Capricorn and Aquarius, because they're all by Saturn, Aratron, Agiel, Zazel. So, where you're likely to use it. And I created in the same style as those with 7 from the Heptameron prayers, or Ratziel and Metatron as well, because we have the seals from the 9 keys. And, Ratziel, for example, you might call on to the prayer to before working with the angels of the mansions of the moon, and Metatron before working with the angels of the Shemham Foresh. So, trying to increase, like I say, put as much information that people might find useful, because, the book's really there as a template that it'll work for people, but for people who experience or have done a few things and want to just take bits out that they like and add them to their own practice, that's one of the big things it's there for, so trying to add useful things in, like that big list of divine names. It's amazing how many names are in the Bible that are not, divine names that aren't in the grimoires. So I've listed lots of these great names and how many times they turn up. Occurs 10 times in the Bible, occurs 437 times in the Bible, etc. Just because I'm a bit OCD about footnotes. I'm not quite sure how many footnotes the book's got. It's probably somewhere close to 300.
I think all of us are so thankful for you doing that, David, because, again, very similar to your Grimoire Encyclopedia, of course, but the tabulations that you make, and yeah, so many people are familiar with the 7 conjurations of the day from the Heptameron, but you've literally created a conjuration of the day, if you will, for Raziel and for Metatron, which is just something that is, again, I think to me that goes to that theme of that verdancy, showing fidelity to the tradition, but also having that malleability to create your own system. I think that's just so lovely. Really great.
Just over 400 footnotes, so I just had a look.
Well, speaking of extra footnotes and your appendices, if you will, one of the things that you talk about as well is you say this is Appendix 6. In Clavis Intelligentiarum, I discussed 4 reasons for consecration. However, on reflection, I consider there is a 5th reason that should be mentioned for consecration, as it is both significant and relevant to the mechanics of conjuration. So, can you tell us a little bit about, for listeners who are excited to pre-order your tome, tell us about the consecrations, tell us about these extra, if you will, consecrations. What do you want listeners to know about this?
So in the first book, I talked about, those reasons for consecration being like bonding between the user and the item, respect to the spirits and deity, purity of the sacred, and magical momentum being put into it. And I added this time something I mentioned previously earlier, which is the aura of purity around the item that gets generated, which makes it like a powerful beacon of energy on the lower astral. And it's making, like a consecrated magic circle full of consecrated items is, although the term gets overused, it is a sacred space. It is full of sacred items. And there's that thing of being able to touch things without direct physical contact with the aura of the item. So yeah, I threw in a few extra things because I thought, well, they weren't specifically there for the first one, but they should be mentioned. Including things like some of the older grimoires mention wearing underwear under the robe. So you can wear consecrated underwear if you prefer not going commando.
Yes.
Because I've never worn underwear under a robe personally, but I've known people who do. And also talked about you can use pure linen or cotton rather than silk for everything, because you end up with a lot of stuff that needs to be stored in silk otherwise, which can be very expensive. Though I suggest the bare minimum of silk on your sword, personal grimoire, and crystal or mirror. Just some point of view practical. Oh, I included a sequence list of the order to do the consecrations in. You can do them in batches. You don't have to do each consecration separately, on different days or anything. You can do a whole load together. So like on the first Sunday, there's like about 10 or 12 consecrations you can do. There's a little Wednesday batch for the pen, wand or staff, name, musical instruments, and the sun. A Thursday batch for basically the metal stuff, sword, black-handled knife, burin, and needle. So I gave the conjuration of the wand and the staff. The consecration of the wand and the staff in here because wasn't necessary for Clavis Intelligenticarum, but I wanted to include, including the procedure and visualization and what have you for the wand cutting. The consecration I took from Half a Gauntlet from 3851 because I liked it a lot more than the Key of Solomon. It just has more oomph to it. Purify me, O God, and I shall be clean. No ill thing shall abide near me. And write the names on the bottom and say, strengthen me, O Lord God, Almighty Creator of all things, as thou didst the rod of Moses that parted the sea in sunder, that the children of Israel passed through safe. Work in me the same virtue, O God, and I shall be so strong that no ill spirit shall abide me. Sanctify me, O God of Sabaoth, and let thy name be glorified in me, that as the rod of Moses did strike the hard stone, and water gushed out, so sanctify thy name, that wheresoever it is written or spoken, all evil and unclean spirits may be excluded. Fiat, fiat, fiat. Amen. Actually, everything's much nicer than the one in the Key of Solomon, so that's the one I use. Shoes or boots, consecration. If you're working outdoors, you're going to want either sensible boots or shoes on. If you're going to wear boots, you probably want socks to avoid blisters, so again, consecrate them like your robe. Also, a little thing about musical instruments, because there's no reason why they can't be added in. There are various grimoires that talk about, like, the Whisper and Secret of Solomon, Swarm of Fenorius. There it's more like a pipe, by the sound of it. The Lyre and Secret of Solomon, the Horn or Trumpet and Key of Solomon, and Tuba Veneris. The Ramphorn, Sixth and Seven Books of Moses. There's a bit in Motu Naturalis, et Naturalis, saying that music is pleasing to the spirits. So if you and your partner who is with you can play music mellifluously, then do it incessantly, as thus they appear sooner. So yeah, music and singing are components you can experiment with, including in. I think that's worth doing after you've had successful conjuration and feel comfortable. But I wanted to I put in consecration of musical instruments for that reason to stress to people. At the end of the day, it is an evolving thing, and it's your personal practice. So if you felt that you want to sing, I mean, for example, when I do my psalm consecration and go through for Pentacles, you can go through the 10 psalms. I sing the whole thing. It takes about 25 minutes. And the Latin, and your throat really feels it by the end of it. But it's like doing conjuration. You really, really feel it. So from that perspective, there's something really lovely about it when you're doing this. That kind of in nomine patris, sort of kind of like tone of voice when you're singing. That I think if you want to incorporate that into a practice, you should. It's about really sticking to the guidelines and the principles of what works, but when you've got that fluidity, do make the changes that make it even better for you. Sometimes it can just be like simple things like adding things in to make, like I said, the language more beautiful for you. or emphasize things like the Shekinah. But things like using a bell at particular times, things like that, or a whistle or a trumpet, all things like that, things that you could incorporate. It's very much, moving forward, and that's part of the beauty of the tradition. There is, people think the grimoires are not set in stone. They haven't ossified. It's been a continuous process. You look at Summa Sacra Magicae, and there's Session Diema, and then D is using it because he owned that copy. He owned a copy of SSM, same one Trithemius owned. And he obviously got the Session Diema that goes into invoking from the SSM. There's a great example of something from centuries earlier being used to, develop another sort of stream of magic in the grimoires. That happened all the time, and so it's only logical for it to happen now, and that's what I'm doing with my practice. Is, like trying to have that fidelity to the good stuff and the principles, but also keeping it relevant for now. Keep it those layers of simplicity that make effective magic. It doesn't need to be overly complex. Put stuff in that doesn't need to be there, but don't skimp either.
Absolutely. In fact, and also the way you organize things. For example, just talking about the consecrations, you and I talked about this on the last podcast, but one of the most vexing things for people just getting into it or practicing your ritual, what do I consecrate first? What do I do? Do I take a shower and a bath and just without anything on, consecrate the circle first? And okay, is it the wax first or is it the charcoals? And the fact that you break it down, you say, hey, Sunday, right? Sunday and frankincense. That's your cornerstone for 80% of a lot of the basics, right? And then you break it down to, Jupiter and Thursday for the sword, for example, or the burren or the needle. And so I love that organization. And then also, the way that you connect the dots is so great. I'm thinking of, you talk about the great work from just published, the great Dr. Gal Sofer about the 15th century Book of Bilith makes reference to the winds in an interesting and explanatory way where it says, quote, and just as the world that comes out of the mouth of the exorcist and the conjurer has gone out, and immediately when it is heard, it passes into their ears, because the spirits are wind, and just like wind, the words are just like wind. They travel in an instant. So it seems to me that you are really taking a serious look throughout your entire research and your entire scholarly work in your book, connecting the dots and straining, finding those nuggets of gold among the broad tradition, which has so much richness in it, and layering an architecture on it that has a very logical harmony and an order to it. I think that's just so great to see.
That's, you summed up what I'm what I'm trying to do, is to just have an effective template. It's built on 44 years ago. I did my first conjuration. Now, and over the years, all the people I've learned from and worked with, it's sort of refined and refined. And I mean, the last year, so between Clavis and Clavis Spirituum, my process has accelerated so much. I've learned so much from other people and from the spirits, and it's been crazy to me. It feels like I moved more in the last year with my personal practice than I did in 5 or 10 years before that. You never know. Things can change so fast, and it has been incredibly rewarding for me. The working with people, the workshops, it's all sort of coalesced, and the conversations with you when I've been bending your ear about things, saying, "What do you think about this, Alexander?" And it's all sort of coalesced into what I hope people will find, is a really useful. I'll say enhanced manual. It's kind of like part 2 and 3 and 4 if Clavis Intelligentiarum was part 1. Because I think it takes several steps for each step that the Intelligentiarum takes. I think there's so much more in there that will help, like the winds and the Shekinah and various other bits. I think that's why I've written it. I was pushed to write it by the spirits to get it out there, to try and encourage more people to do the work, to engage with the spirits. They want it to happen. So, what can you do? You can be true to what you are. And at the end of the day, I took an oath when I was 14 that I would devote my life to magic. And that's what I've done ever since.
I can tell you, David, just simply to echo that I know all of us, the thousands and thousands of listeners and readers, are so thankful for what you do. And I have to say, it has been one of the privileges of my life, especially in the magical sphere. All of our private and public conversations that we've had in discussing nuances. Oh, I have learned so much from you. The way that you write, the way that you think about new things and think about new ideas, and seeing how you think about it in real time, and the fruits of that, of how you think and put things together, is seen in Clavis Spirituum. So I can truly say that it's certainly been one of the biggest honors for me as well. I think this goes to your point about the tradition. Would it be safe to say that the Solomonic tradition is, to borrow a mercurial phrase, it's quicksilver, right? It's not set in stone. It's this constantly evolving thing. And I think conversations like this, the podcast format, or, private conversations, is there something also to the oral tradition of like working things out and discussing and having those dialogues? I think that's a pretty important thing as well, to your point.
Yeah. And using that quicksilver analogy, it's interesting that the most common ore that we get mercury from is cinnabar, mercury sulfide. So it's literally mercury with the sulfur added. So as an alchemical thing of it, it's like we are being the sulfur that fixes that mercury in the cinnabar, to make the fluid solid, make the intangible tangible.
It's lovely. That's absolutely, because it's about that. If you really want to be showing fidelity to the Solomonic tradition, it is adaptability and it is evolution, and you really give that so much, David. As we wrap up this podcast here, although I know there will certainly be more in the future, I definitely always want to ask you, because over the last year especially, but even before that, seeing how you are truly always working on something. As you say, sometimes spiritual inspiration comes in the middle of the night and you have to jot something down, and you have to, at opportune and inopportune hours, you're always working on something. So can you give us any hints? Obviously, people are huge fans of as I gesture to my bookshelf, the Grimoire Encyclopedia, Volumes 1 and 2. You have Clavis Spirituum, that check the links below, listeners, to pre-order or order, if you're watching this later, your copy. What else can you tell us, David? What other projects are you working on?
Okay, well, some stuff is under wraps, but I have started doing work on Volume 3 of the Grimoire Encyclopedia. It's going to take quite a while. And I've done a little bit for Claves Ultra Circulum, but I don't think that's going to be out for a couple of years, because there's going to be quite a lot of stuff I will need to be testing on that, and that I would be putting out for people, because that is going to be more focused on the grimoire tradition, away from conjuration, the other bits. So that's going to take some time. Let's say there's a couple of others that I'm working on, but I won't share until they're closer to fruition. And I'm writing a novel as well.
Huh. Oh my goodness! I know. This is like, so. Truly, when do you sleep? Do you not really? Maybe a few hours a night.
Yeah, probably not as much as. Well, I think you get used to having less sleep. I mean, Victoria, like I used to, sleep talks at times. So she'll say something. I'm awake. Is she awake? No, she sounds asleep. She's talking in her sleep. So yeah, I'm getting by less sleep than I used to. I'm kind of more used to that. Also, she likes to get up quite early, but yeah, the little person will come to the bed. Daddy, I'm awake. Get up. Come on.
See, you already have your own familiar, right? You already have your own magical assistant in many ways, right?
I think I'll probably end up being her assistant.
Okay, touche. Very, very well said. From everything that you've shared about Victoria, I can absolutely understand that. Well, David, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time. And listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this. Check the links below, because the pre-order link, or again, if you're watching this a little bit later, the order link, you really do. You must pick up a copy of Clavis Spirituum, because what David's done here is groundbreaking, and it's directly plugged into the Solomonic tradition, and it's forward thinking for the 21st century. And so I can just say, author, esoteric researcher, magician, David Rankine, teacher. Thank you so much, David, for just taking some time and sharing about Clavis Spirituum and all of the richness of your insights on the podcast today. Really appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks, Ivan.